All right. Guess I'll wait and see if anybody shows up. I'm now speaking to people who might be watching this later. I did not announce this. I had no plans for this. I was just sitting around on a Friday night and thought I'd pop online and see if anybody was around. It's always a nervous point where you're sitting and wondering, is anybody actually going to show up? Because if they don't, it's going to be a little embarrassing. This is what I get for doing a live stream without announcing it first. Oh, I've got some people showing up now. Can you guys all hear, or can anyone hear me? Please let me know in the chat. Blue Jean Van Life. Hey, how you doing? So this is completely unstructured. I didn't plan to do it more than like 2 minutes ago. Eridohe. I hope Eridohel. Thank you for letting me know you can hear me. I hope I pronounced your name right. Oh, sorry, I was playing with my kitty, if you're wondering why I've got marks on my hand. Yeah, I had no particular plans. I was just sitting around and thought, I'm going to go live and see if anybody's around. Partly because I'm not going to have a video this weekend, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. But I thought, let's just see if anybody has any questions. So, oh, if it wasn't 3 a.m., I'm sorry, Ricky. Well, tell you what, Ricky, if it's 3 a.m. and you're here, if you want to ask a question, I'll answer yours first so you can go to bed without well, go to bed. It's already 3 a.m. You probably should have been in bed by now, unless you're a night shift person. But yeah, if anyone has any questions or tell me about your project. Again, I had no reason for starting this except I decided to, and I wanted to say hi to y'all. I got some messages coming in. I guess I'll talk in the meantime. So I've been wanting to try to do a video once a week. Tom from New Mexico. Hello, Tom. And it's been a little bit tricky because it's hard to artificially create content. I'm just me. This is just me documenting my project. And if I don't have something that's visual to show, I can't really fake it. So I really want to try to keep this like one video a week thing going. But just it's been a lot of learning on my part. And the big thing I've been learning right now is STM32. So if you saw the old videos, I was doing a lot of the work. Now it's all good. Love seeing your progress. Keep it up. Well, thank you very much, Ricky. So I had always planned that the Arduino was going to be just basically, I've never done embedded programming before. I've done Perl programming for servers, so I understand programming logic. I don't call myself a programmer. I say that because I know people who are programmers and they really enjoy the art of programming, where I've always been sort of the kind of person who's a sysadmin who programs to make problems go away. And so I say that because I have a lot to learn. So the Arduino was it meant I didn't have to worry about all the tools getting in the way. I could just sit down and start working on getting the throttle working. But I always knew that was just going to be stage one. So sorry, I got messages coming in. I can't tell what's coming from the live stream or not. So where was I? The train just jumped the tracks. Right, so I always knew that the Arduino was going to be relatively limited, and I have kind of ambitious plans for the boat. I mean, that's pretty obvious. Everything I've been doing is very ambitious, but I've got a whole lot of things I want to do where the helm is just the start. So I knew I was going to have to, at some point, stop with the Arduino and port everything over to STM32. I didn't know the differences between STM32 and, here we go. ESP32 until I started this project. But I knew they were the grown-up microprocessors or development environments. I don't even know what the proper term for them is. So after I got the helm working at the end of the last video, I decided it was time. Like, I've got this screen. So if you saw in the video, I was watching the serial output. It was a long string, but this is like 2 rows of text. Okay, back up again. I want to keep the helm looking like it's 1981. So everything I'm doing with the mechanical switches and stuff, I'm trying to imagine what 1981 sci-fi would have looked like. So this fits the era. And I was at the point where I wanted to be able to display things like the throttle position, the regen position, and whatnot on this screen. But the more I went down the road with Arduino, the bigger the job would be to port to STM32. So I thought, no, it's time to stop. I've got the helm working. I want to now port this over. This, by the way, was given to me by my friend Andrew, who you've seen in the previous videos. He's been helping me learn a lot of this stuff. So the learning curve for going from Arduino, to use a comparison, the Arduino is Lego. It's a bunch of bricks that just kind of clip together, and you can make things. It's very easy. It's very intuitive. It's lovely. It's fun. Going from the Arduino to the STM32 was kind of like going from Lego to, okay, here's a construction company, go build a building. The learning curve is basically straight up. So it's been taking me a while to get this sorted out, but I've started to figure out the differences between when would you want to use STM32 versus ESP32. But all of this process is just a lot of learning. AVR, the chip in Arduino, is a reasonable choice. It deals well with the voltage spikes and shorts. The STM32 is more fragile. So I don't know enough to disagree or agree, so I'm going to take your word for it. That said, my friend Andrew, who's been helping me with all of this project, who's basically, we've got another project we've been working on together. Part of the reason I'm doing this is so that I can learn enough that I can start helping with this other project, but more on that in a future video. He uses STM32s primarily, and his job has been developing products for like 20 some years. So though you might be right that the STM, in fact, I could absolutely believe that the STM is less durable than the Arduino. Actually, I've got a few Arduinos. I didn't mean to stage this, but here we go. So these are the Arduinos. They are designed for newbies to learn on. So it makes sense to me that they are much more fault tolerant and robust than an STM32. But they have a lot of limitations. So for example, I took the code that I had, and with the Arduino IDE, I was able to load it directly onto the STM32. So this this ESP32, which I just bought, already has the helm control code on it. I could, in theory, drop this in as a replacement for the Arduino, and things should just work. But when I was talking to Andrew about it, he was saying, look, you really want to use the STM32 for anything that has to do with safety critical components of the helm. I've already added a lot of complexity by having a microcontroller sit in between the mechanical helm controls and the Kelly controller. I have my reasons for justifying that. I can go into them later if people ask questions. But knowing that I'm going to put a computer between the physical helm and the control of my motor, I wanted to have the most robust system I could. And STM32s are used, like your car, if you've got a car that's at all modern, you have STM32s sitting between you and your car's controls, which is actually one of the reasons why I really like them, because they have a whole suite of sensors. And depending on how the chat goes, I might tell you a bit about my longer term plans. But the STM32 is more basic than the ESP32, and that's a good thing from a stability perspective. When you get them working, they work reliably. The ESP32, you can see it's got this little thingy here. That's a radio. So this has got Bluetooth and wireless, and it can do all of this modern stuff, where this is much more basic. So my current plan is I'm going to have the the STM32 for the core things like the throttle controls, the helm controls, and whatnot, and then the ESP32 for all of the fancy things. So if you've seen any of my old videos, you know that I've got an electric car. And one of the things I love about the electric car is that I don't have a key anymore. I walk up to the car and it reads my phone. And as soon as it sees my phone within Bluetooth, it just unlocks the car. I get in and I just drive. I don't even have a button to press to turn it on. I just get in and I just go. It just works. And similarly, when I get out of the car, I never lock it anymore. I just walk away and it locks. So my current plan is to have the ESP32 as one example. I'm going to load onto it a set of Bluetooth, I think they're MAC addresses, whatever the address is. MAC address I know is used for networking, but I'll have a set of Bluetooth addresses recorded into the STM32 so that if the STM32 sees a device within wireless range that has a authorized MAC address, it sends a signal to the STM32 to say the helm is now enabled. And if it doesn't, the helm is disabled. So without having a mechanical key for the boat, well, the phone becomes the mechanical key, or any kind of RFID transmitter, Bluetooth device, whatever I decide to use. There will be, I can hear people saying, because it was in my own head, was, well, what happens if you lose your phone? Or what happens if the STM32 or the ESP32 breaks? So I keep mixing them up because I'm still learning this myself. I will have somewhere that I'm not going to talk about on hey, Mark Rose, how you doing? Yes, a surprise live. I literally decided to do this like 2 minutes before it started. Impulse. Anyways, somewhere that I'm not going to show on YouTube, there's going to be mechanical override so that if the ESP32 fails or whatever, I can force the helm on mechanically or directly. Again, mind me being vague. If you're putting your boat on YouTube, you should probably keep a little bit of the security stuff a little bit. So there you go. Anyways, one of the other things I'm thinking of doing long-term is, I'll tell you a bit about my long-term plans because you're here for the live. So putting the throttle under computer control means that eventually I don't have to have the input that decides the signal to be sent to the Kelly controller to say how much throttle and which direction to give. It doesn't have to come from that potentiometer. It can come from anything. So if you recall from back when I was talking about why I chose the boat I did, one of the things I was looking for was the largest boat that I thought I could comfortably single-hand, but big enough that I could have other people on it, because I don't want to sail alone. I'd like to have people with me, long-term crew and short-term crew. But losing crew on my trip home just re-emphasized how important it is that I need to be able to run the boat completely by myself if nobody's on it. So when I was taking my sailing lessons, one of the things that we were learning about was the how to do anchoring. And when we were doing the anchoring, you'd have somebody up at the windlass working the actual anchor, and they taught you the hand symbols to send to the person who's at the helm. You know, go forward, go backwards, etc. Go right, go left, go port, starboard. Hey, Maddie, been a while. Have to admit, I've been stacking unit episodes for the last 9 months. I was way too busy. Hey, tourist, listen. Obviously, I want everybody to watch my videos because I'm vain like that. But at the same time, I have a lot of YouTube channels that I follow that I desperately want to keep up to date with, and I just sometimes I can't, and it just you fall behind and you jump back later on. So. The fact that folks watch at all is awesome. If somebody falls behind, no problem whatsoever. When the time works out and you can catch up, love to have you back. So yeah, please don't feel bad about falling behind. It's totally cool. If I covered something in a video and somebody has a question, I have no problem repeating myself. So yeah, go ahead and ask questions again. Good to see you have arrived. The fun part, aka programming. Sorry, tourist. It has like a heart icon and it covers the text of whatever the last message was, which is slightly annoying. Anyways, what was I saying? Right. So from the helm control, if I want to do anchoring by myself and I've got a stock anchor and I have to be up forward, I want to have a remote control. But what I've got so far with the throttle gives me forward and reverse. It doesn't give me steering yet. So I was just doing a Patreon call. I pronounced that really weird. I was doing a Patreon call and I was talking about some of the plans, and one of them is I have to pull the prop and prop shaft out. And I realized, oh crap, I have to drop the rudder to do that, which made me very, very upset because that's a lot of work I wasn't expecting. But the upside is I had to pull apart the running gear, the steering gear anyways, just because I have to do that. But it got me thinking about the fact that one of the longer term plans is to put computer controlled hydraulic rams onto the quadrant. So for those of you who are not familiar with sailing, if you saw any of the videos when I was down in the lazarette, when I was doing the engine prep work, it looks like a quarter circle, big brass quarter circle thing that has cables going over it. That's called the quadrant. So when you turn the wheel up at the in the cockpit, it literally just has a chain that goes down to a cable that's wrapped around the quadrant. So as you turn it one way, it pulls the quadrant to one side or to the other, and the rudder is bolted into it. So as the quadrant goes to one side, I'm exaggerating, but the rudder turns port to starboard. So my boat originally had, though it's never worked since I bought it, a belt-driven autopilot. So what that was is there was like a motor that stuck that had like underneath the wheel, and there was a belt that would go up around the wheel, so the motor would try to turn the wheel. Those are not very strong and they're prone to breaking. Having hydraulic rams to actually push on the quadrant directly, Mark, I'm sorry you missed it as well, but I mean, dude, feel free to ask questions here. It's not voice like we do with Zoom, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions. So it gives you a lot stronger pushing force for being able to steer it. And there's a program called PyPilot, which is an open source application for doing autopilot work. So you can take your GPS data and you can say, go to this position, turn this number of degrees, go to the next GPS position, and you can basically plot a course and it'll autopilot by itself. So in the same way that I've got currently the Arduino, but soon the STM working for being able to handle the throttle, I also want to be able to take control of the hydraulic rams for steering. Once that's done, I will be able to create a remote control that will allow me to not just go forward and reverse, but also steer port starboard. So I could be up on the bow trying to deal with my anchor, even if it's stuck, for example, and have a remote control, like a joystick from a PlayStation, but not like they did in the submarine. Well, no, probably exactly, it's just not as life critical. Anyways, so that I could control the boat from the bow. Once I've got that level of control over the boat, I could do something. Now I'm getting, let me be very clear. This is like super long-term speculation, but this is just like plans I've got in mind. I could put a Bluetooth beacon on my PFD so that when I'm sailing, if I ever fell off the boat, as soon as the Bluetooth signal was lost, I could have the helm send an alarm, and if nobody cancels the alarm, have it actually turn around and come back to the GPS location where the Bluetooth was last seen and stop. So I could actually have the boat be like, oh, I lost my skipper. Let me go back and wait. And I could even, anyways, is that going to work? Is it practical? No freaking clue, but that's part of the reason why I'm doing this work, because that's the kind of thing I want to do long-term with the boat. So I've been prattling a whole lot. Anybody have questions? So this is the awkward part now where I sit here and I wait for somebody to ask a question. Or I should say, tell me about your projects as well. What are you guys working on? Also, Prost. Let me see, while I'm waiting for questions, is there any other updates I can give you? But yeah, I guess just to summarize, that's why I'm struggling to make a video right now. It's not that things aren't happening. They're happening. It's just, how do you make a video out of someone sitting there looking at their keyboard like this going, It's not great content. So with the Starlink, are you going to let us remotely control? So the answer to your question is no, but there's more to it than that. So one of the things, remember I was saying about how the STM32 is used in cars. I mean, it's used everywhere. There is a whole suite of sensors, MEMS sensors, I think they're called, for the STM32. Gyroscopes, accelerometers, proximity sensors, temperature sensors, barometric pressure sensors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Controlling the boat using Gaming controller joystick sounds like, dude, absolutely. My house will be a remote control vehicle. Like, okay, I say that. If things work out, my house will become a remote control vehicle. Hey, Simple Electronics, how are you doing? Actually, I hope you didn't just join, because I just went on this big, long, prattling talk about ESP32, STM32, Arduino, and all that stuff that was going on, which was right up your alley. Love your content. I'm into e-bikes and solar. I want to build an electric car, which is, oh, dude, Travis Solar Life. If you don't already know, Carlson, Project Lightning. Check YouTube for Project Lightning if you're not already familiar with it. He just did he's still doing, Bill Carlson. He is doing a conversion of a DeLorean using a Chevy Bolt's batteries and drivetrain to build an electric DeLorean, and it's already moving under its own power. It is a fantastic AV project. Hey, Patrick. Manual sailing, need another Mergirl. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, Patrick. Oh, did I miss any comments? Travis Solar Life, Simple Electronics, exhausted, and yes, I just joined, so of course I did. Okay, well, I can give you an update another time. Mark, I was just starting to read your message, and then I saw it disappear. Catholic hello. I'm not quite sure what to make of that. We'll look that up, thanks. Yeah, Bill does a fantastic channel. It's a brilliant project. He took a long hiatus, but he's back to making videos again. Aging Wheels, Underdone, yes. Love that guy. He is fantastic content. He's got a lot of really quirky electric cars. Yes, he's working. Oh yeah, the Ford Escape. He's putting no, it's not a Tesla drivetrain. It's Tesla motors, but it's somebody else's batteries. It's like a hybrid system. But he's got a couple of electric cars now, but they're all like, he had that, oh God, it was like a super cheap looking sedan from a company that went bust. Aging Wheels, Underdone is the secondary channel. Another brilliant channel to watch. Oh, his whole thing is just quirky cars. It's not all electric, but he's got a lot of electric stuff there. What was I saying? I was talking about, oh yeah, the other sensors. Somebody asked about being able to remotely control my boat. No, but, so one of the things, my day job, I do high availability clustering. And what our company does that makes us a little bit special is that we wrote software to be able to handle environmental threats. So if the power goes out, if the room's overheating or whatever, it collects data from all of these disparate sources, takes that data into a central decision engine called ScanCore, and then parses that information and makes bigger picture decisions. I want to port that to my boat. So I want to start collecting information. Like, for example, one very simple example of this is, if I have a seacock that can be opened, I may not want to actually do this with the seacock. I might do this from my fresh water tanks. But if I can say, dump, say 20 liters of water. No, I don't want to do that because that'd be my fresh water that I'm drinking. Anyways, dump a known quantity of water into the bilge and make sure that it gets pumped overboard, and measure how long it takes to pump it overboard. And do that automatically once a week, once every 2 weeks, something like that, as a way to determine if my bilge pumps are starting to fail. So I can get an alarm that, hey, it took 50% longer than expected to empty your bilge. Please check your bilge pumps. Stuff like that. But one of the things I want to be able to do, and another one of the reasons why I'm making this ESP32, is range is something that I'm really, 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 really focused on with my build. How efficient can I be? I want to be able to monitor the power going into the motor. I want to have wind sensors so I can see what is the speed of the wind, which direction is it coming from, what's the current water temperatures, wave height, measure all of this, the power coming from the batteries, the prop RPM, my speed over ground as processed by GPS data, to figure out that based on the current environmental conditions, what speed gives me the maximum range for my current battery capacity, and have that live update based on the current conditions. So that if I'm caught in the doldrums, for example, or I can say, optimize for maximum range, optimize for a balance of range and time, or if I know I'm going to a shore where I'm going to be able to plug in, I just need to be able to go 50 miles. How fast can I go and safely get there? So you know how if you've got an electric car, it gives you sort of like, at the current speed, you're going to have this many miles of available distance. That, but factoring in all of this additional information. as all of this information is collected and fed into the database for ScanCore that I was talking about earlier, I want to live upload it. No, sorry, not live upload it. I need to have a little bit of privacy. I want to take this data and upload it to a public server, and then maybe with like a 1-week delay, share all of that information. It would basically turn my boat into a traveling weather station, but it would also, because it'll have accelerometers on it, so I'll be able to measure the boat's roll, what is that, yaw and pitch, mix them up, but basically three-dimensional position of the boat, but I'll also have force sensors, and I'll have a GPS, so I'll be able to see how high are the waves. All of this information will be stored into a database that'll be uploaded over Starlink to some server in the cloud, and that I plan to share publicly. Is it going to be useful? I have no clue, but I want to share it and just see what people do with it. Okay, wow, I've just rambled on for a whole long. Let's see, Tesla Motors, Buick hybrid cells, and AEM control boards replacing the Tesla. Oh, Sam, that's what Underdone is doing. Aging wheels, yes. Edison Motors just got their first electric diesel. I saw that on TikTok. He got his license plate, a British Columbia license plate. Edison Motors. Oh, there's some delicious irony that Tesla was a very cool person and Edison was a complete asshole, and now you flipped around the companies. I am very, very, very excited about what Edison is doing. I love their approach to electric with a diesel generator for like logging trucks and stuff like that. Edison Motors is brilliant. If I had any money to spare, I would be wanting to buy Edison stocks. But unfortunately, all of my money is going into this project, so that's not happening. But yes, Edison is incredibly fascinating. I am very stoked to see what they do. Patrick Watson Sen. I'm not quite sure what you mean, Patrick. I'm very sorry. You've had a few messages now, and I'm really trying to understand what you're saying. I'm sorry I'm being daft. I'll catch this tomorrow. All right, night, Simple Electronics. Mark Rose, what kind of intelligence? You get an awesome autopilot, especially if you tie in AIS to avoid ships. So I mentioned earlier about when I was talking about how I wanted to be able to have the remote control for the boat so I could do things like setting and unsetting the anchor myself. But one of the other things I'm really worried about on solo passages is sleep. You're not supposed to leave the helm at all when you're underway. But if you're solo, that's just not possible. If you're on a multi-week passage, you have to sleep. So talking to people, it's like you take 15-minute power naps. You wake up, you check around, make sure there's nothing, and then you lay down for another 15 minutes. And this is the cycle you go through, but it's exhausting. Obviously, that's still going to be what I'm going to want to do, but there's a part of me that's really worried that I'll be able to actually do that. So whilst that's going to stay my goal, I also want to improve my safety by having AIS. So I do plan to have an AIS transmitter and receiver and a radar. Anything I buy from a company like Raymarine, Garmin, B&G, I don't know if I'm going to be able to parse the data coming in from their devices because it's largely a closed ecosystem. So I'm going to be looking for AIS transmitter receivers that put data onto the NMEA 2000 or CAN bus. If I can get that data and I can parse it, then I could do things like tie it into the autopilot so that if it calculates that I'm on a collision course, A, trigger an alarm, but B, if there's no response from the alarm, take corrective actions automatically. So I have no idea how much of this is feasible. This is all just fever dreams at this point, but it gives you an idea of the kind of stuff I'm thinking about and why I'm putting my helm under computer control. Let's see, what other questions? Hola, I got a notification for this life, so just wanted to say hi. Oh, Dom! Hey, Dom, how are you doing? That makes me really happy that you're here. Thank you. Uriel's machine, Prosit. Oh, Prost. I am building a solar tracking system for a World War II searchlight mirror as a solar concentrator using a Raspberry Pi for various control functions and weather monitoring. Dude, that sounds absolutely amazing. If you're documenting this on YouTube or whatever, I think URLs get chomped, but put your channel name down. I would love to see what you're doing. And if you're not, then think about starting one. That sounds like a really fun project. Custom monitoring solution is one of the things I love to do. Clients never really want it until the day it saves them money. Yeah, see, Tourist, One of the things that makes me really excited about this whole boat project is that I do a lot of this same kind of work for my day job, but everything has to be justified by what the market will bear. I want my boat to be just my playground. I want to build things with no concern about whether they make any kind of a practical sense. I want to build things because I want to and no other justification. Stares wistfully. Clarity awaits. Okay. Um, that sounds hardcore for resting. Yeah, tourists, that is one thing. Of all the things that I think about when it comes time to travel on the boat, the thing that makes me the most nervous is solo. If I have somebody else for crew, you do 4-hour rotations, it's totally fine. But solo, and I want to be able to do solo. I don't ever want to be in a situation where I want to go somewhere and I can't because I'm by myself. I need to be able to do solo. And I am not going to rely on any of my technology to keep me safe. As the skipper, my responsibility is to keep the boat safe. I cannot rely on anything else. But having as many aids as possible to enhance my safety is, yeah, I am terrified of laying down for a 15-minute sleep and just not waking up, especially if I'm doing like a Pacific crossing where it's 2 to 3 weeks, like when Slocum did it in the 1800s, he was pretty safe not to crash into anything. That's not the way it is these days. Um, there is open source software for receiving AIS. Oh, it's software defined radio. Excellent. Good to know. Okay. So that means that that's going to be a lot more realistic. Again, this is all just fever dream ideas. I have done nothing towards seeing about what is practical and what isn't practical. So that makes me very happy to hear that I can probably pull that data in. Talking about documentation, how are you going to document all of your designs? There's already a GitHub repo. So right now it's really basic. It's just for the one file that I've got for the Arduino sketch for the helm controls. But over time, I've got I think it's under Digimer. So I've got right now Mermaid's Rest. I'll probably start to break it up as I get more projects, but it's all going to be recorded on GitHub. So if you look Mermaid's Rest on GitHub, that's where it is currently. I will never claim to be a good programmer, but I do pride myself on my documentation. I tend to document things quite a bit. I've already created a media wiki instance, a wiki for the boat project. I haven't done much with it yet, but over time, everything's going to start to get documented in the wiki as well. It's just a question of hours at this point. I caught up with chat. Yay! Anyone else have any questions or comments? I've done the 15-minute wake ups during time constraint nighttime system migrations. Yeah, it's so working in IT. I have done a lot of 24-hour, 48-hour, and longer shifts without sleep. And this is one of the reasons I think why the 15-minute sleep rotation scares me so much, because I have pulled all-nighters. When I was in my 20s, it was rough. Doing it in my 40s, it's really rough. By the time I've got the boat to the point where I'm living on it and I'm doing crossings, I'm 46 now. I'll probably be 47, 48 before I start doing my first ocean crossing. I am under no illusion of what my constitution can handle by then. I know people older than me do it, so I trust that I can figure it out and I can do it, but yeah, it worries me quite a bit. So let's see, what else? I guess I'll give an insurance update while I wait to see if anyone else has any questions. Oops, knocked over my spool of wire. So one of the big things that's been a problem is insurance. Originally, I didn't plan to do the smart helm, for lack of a better term, at this early in the project. I wanted to be ripping the engine out and building the mounts and mounting it and building the battery casings and all that kind of stuff. But I think I mentioned this before. Yeah, definitely mentioned this before in some of the videos, but in case you haven't caught up with the current videos, my current insurance provider, I'm not taking any chances. I'm putting everything above board. So I called my insurance company and I said, or I would talk to my broker, and I told my broker, I'm getting ready to pull the engine. Can you talk to the underwriter to make sure there's not going to be a problem? Yeah, that was a problem. They were like, yep, once you start the conversion, we're dropping you. You have to find a new policy. So long story short, so long as my diesel engine's in my boat, I have insurance. Once I pull the diesel engine, I lose insurance. 56 hours is my limit. Anything longer and it becomes really hard to actually, yeah. I'm R deep. I'm not. Hi, I'm new here. So, any advice for rookies who want to build their own boat or something? I have lots of ideas. I will make no claims that any of my suggestions are good, but I'll finish my insurance talk and then I'll answer your question. So, at that point, I'm not willing to go without insurance. Coordinating failing wind conditions and forecasting with the Auto Desert Island Tractor. Yes. Once the more data that comes in to, I'm going to have like a NUC or like a microcomputer, like a proper full-on computer that's going to do the processing all of the data that's coming in from various data sources. Once I've got the data into the database, Postgres, then pulling the data out of the database and making high-level decisions is something that's what I do for a living. So that's going to be, for me, because of my background, the easy part. Anyways, 15 minutes is because you have about that much time for a boat to arrive at your location from being over the horizon. Yeah, Mark Rose, that's exactly why the 15 minutes thing is there, because after 15 minutes, you could hit something you didn't see before. And I really want to emphasize, I'm not using the technology so I can sleep longer than 15 minutes. I want the technology in case I sleep longer than 15 minutes, despite my best efforts. So getting back to the insurance. So there's two components to insurance from my perspective. Protecting my own boat, because if I lost my boat, that would be the end of the project. I don't have the money to, I mean, you notice I don't, there we go. I don't have trim over my doors. Like I'm not living with a whole lot of money here. I mean, I'm not complaining. I drive an electric car, but at the same time, I'm not exactly flush with cash either. So if anything happened and I lost my boat, that would be the end of it, which would be heartbreaking. But at least it would only be for me. My biggest fear, the second part of insurance, and the part that I am really, really, really fighting for, is the liability insurance. If something happened and I hurt somebody else's boat and I didn't have the money to fix it, I mean, I would have to find the money to fix it, but it means I would lose my house. And right now, my house is my only, I don't have savings. I don't have retirement funds. All of my money is tied up in this house. So if something happened and I damaged somebody else's boat, or I sank in a fairway and I had to be salvaged right away, it could literally cost me my house if I don't have insurance. So knowing that I can't work on my boat right now until I sort out insurance, I was kind of at a standstill, which is why I put the Helm project further ahead, because it's like, well, if I can't work on the boat directly, at least I can move this project forward, because it was always part of the project plans anyway. So, Amardeep, I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. Buying a boat, I think if I went back, if I wanted to give the advice to me when I first decided I wanted to buy a boat, it would be this. I was asking, what's the Postgres is bad, Bestgres. Yes. I love Postgres. Don't talk to me about MySQL or Maria. Anyways, getting back to Amardeep's question. I was under the impression that there is a best boat for a task. And I'm like, what is the best boat for me? Like, what is the best boat? That was the question I was asking. And I realized as time went on, there is no such thing. There's the best boat for your set of requirements. So when I first got started, I thought I wanted a heavy displacement, full keel, battle axe of a boat. And this is something that I have since seen a lot of people who want to do long distance cruising. They're like, I want to have like an old classic, super heavy, like tank of a boat. And to put specific names to that, when I first decided I wanted a boat and I started looking, I thought I wanted something called the West Sail 43. This boat is like 28 tons. It is like an inch solid fiberglass. It's catch rig, so there's two masts. When I was reading the reviews, they were saying things like, build like a tank. Unfortunately, it sails like one too. And I was thinking to myself, well, that's fine. I don't care if it's slow. I want to be able to survive if I'm stupid. But then I was talking to my friend Damien from Damien and Jess from Brewpeg, and he was really working hard to talk me out of that. And he was like, the way he put it was, he said, imagine trying to control an elephant that's drunk and wearing rollerblades. He's like, that's what it's going to be like to dock your boat. And at the time I thought, well, I'm not going to be docking very often, so I don't care. I was thinking from the perspective of I'm comfortable with the boat, I'm traveling. I glossed over the first part of learning to sail. Long story short, he talked me out of it, and I started looking for much lighter displacement boats. And the biggest reasons for that is when I started doing the math for how far could I go with an electric boat if I had one of these big, heavy battle tanks, it was ridiculously little distance. And when I realized that I wanted to be able to run very long distances on a relatively small battery pack, my battery pack compared to most boats is huge, but my battery pack compared to what I could afford and fit in the boat wasn't going to be very much. So I started looking for performance hulls. The upside to that is that when I bought it, I realized even with a boat that is extremely maneuverable, something that is very easy to steer and easy to control when I was coming home and Colin was on the boat, before I got up to the first lock, he was like, go as slow as you can and see how slow you are when you lose steerage. I was down to a knot, like 1 nautical mile per hour, and I could still steer my boat. And that was shockingly, like, you shouldn't be able to steer at such a low speed. And it speaks to how nimble my boat is. I can turn my boat on a dime. My boat is basically a sports car when it comes to like a Miata for how nimble it is. Even with that amount of control, I was still terrified of docking and undocking my boat. If I had started off with a heavy displacement full keel boat, which is far harder to steer, I don't think I would have gotten over the learning curve. I would have been so scared to take that boat out and bring it back in that I probably just wouldn't have. So if you're looking to get into boating and you're looking at crossing oceans, start with the smallest, nimblest boat that you can get. Learn on that and then step up as time goes on. That was a very long answer. If that was a good enough answer, MRD, awesome. If you have any follow-up questions, please ask. Let me see what I've missed on chat. Postgres is bestgres. I missed the spiel at the start about STM32 ESP32. So not sure if it's covered, but do you have plans for more general compute on board, something to run a full? Yes. So I did talk a lot about that, but I didn't go into any details about the general computing environment on the boat. So I am being very mindful of the power consumption of devices I'm going to have on the boat. It's one of the other reasons of switching to these devices is once I've got them programmed, I can downclock them so that they pull the least amount of electricity as possible when they're operating. But I can't get around the fact. So I had bought some Raspberry Pis. These are the Raspberry Pi 4s. And originally, those were going to be my compute environments. But as I started playing with them, I realized, sorry, I got to take these out. They're bothering me. I realized they're not reliable enough or powerful enough for what I want to do. So my current plan is, if you're familiar with the Intel NUCs, they were like the new unit of computing. Intel's terrible at marketing, but it was basically what they tried to do with ITX motherboards, and that's not going to mean much if you're not in computers from like 10 years ago. NUCs successfully did. Very, very small computing platforms that were low power consumption, but relatively high processing power. So I'm probably going to have, well, Intel doesn't make NUCs anymore, but I'll probably do something like a Dell Optiplex Micro, Core i5 or an AMD variant, something like that, that will run the Postgres database. So all of the devices that I'm planning to create for collecting data from the various sensors that I've got and the various controls that I want to have, they will put their data onto a bus. What exactly is this going to look like? I don't know, because this is all super early days. So what I'm going to say right now, please understand that this could be completely unfeasible and I'll change my plans dramatically. But as I'm imagining them right now, each of these devices, whatever data they're collecting from whatever sensors they have, will dump the data onto either CAN bus or Enemy A2000. Now, Enemy A2000 is to have something that's technically Enemy A2000, you have to pay a license a year to be able to get access to, which I can't do. But there's people who've reverse engineered Enemy A2000. So it's Enemy A2000 compatible, but they can't use the term Enemy A2000 because that is trademarked. but I digress. They'll put their information on the NMEA 2000 bus, and I'm going to call it a NUC just for lack of better terms. The computer, the real computer, will listen and collect the data as it comes in, parse it, and record it into the database. A lot of these devices have SD cards on them, and I'm planning to add, if not SD cards, some sort of writable memory so that they can keep recording, say, the last 2 hours worth of their sensor data, so that if the NUC goes offline or reboots or whatever, when it comes back up, it can send out a message to all the devices saying, please retransmit logs since timestamp X, and then have them all respond and dump the data out so that it can pick up the data that was missing, so I don't have holes in my data even if the computer reboots. Intel makes new 13th gen NUCs. I think that was the last generation. NMEB 3000, yeah, something like that. So that computer that has the Postgres database will run a modified version of my ScanCore software, which will then take all of this data and make the decisions like based on the winds and the wind strength, the wind direction, wave height, where you're trying to go, the distance to your next target, the amount of power. The weather forecast is calling for lots of sun, so I can use more power because I'm going to make some back with solar, or the winds are going to be really low, so I need to be conserving my batteries. Take the weather forecast information and come up with, at the helm, I want to basically have a three-way switch: optimized for maximum range, balanced, or I want to go fast, I'm in a hurry, I'm in a rush. And depending on which switch position, it'll tell me what the ideal throttle position is, taking into account all of this information. What does that actual calculation and sends that data to the helm that at this current time, here's your 3 optimal throttle positions. That'll be done by the NUC and then just sent to the STM32. I don't plan to do that level of processing on the STM32. So it'll just basically listen for data coming in off the NMEA 2000 bus or the CAN bus. I'm going to say NMEA 2000. It could be CAN bus. It could be TCP/IP. I haven't decided yet. But it'll basically listen for what those optimal settings are and just display them on the little screen that'll be on the helm. Okay, did I miss any conversations? Your boat seems to be very smooth in the water. Yeah, Travis. It's very smooth in the water when the water is calm. My boat is very lightweight for its length and its age. Modern boats at 38, they hit my weight. But for back in 1981, my boat was considered very lightweight. The translation to that is, in bad weather, I'm going to get tossed around a lot more than a heavier displacement boat, just because I don't have a lot of gravity to keep. When you're being tossed around by the waves, the more weight you have in your keel, the more it's going to resist that motion. The heavier your boat is, the more stable it's going to be, the more comfortable it is. So my boat is very smooth. It's very quick. But as soon as the weather gets bad, I'm not kidding myself. My boat's not going to be comfortable if in a rolly anchorage or in a storm. I'm going to be tossed around and probably tossing my cookies. And that's the trade-off for a maneuverable boat. Fading out as old school MySQL guys, often handling systems built long ago. Yeah. So MySQL it was a lot of features and it was very approachable. It was very easy to use. I understand why people used MySQL. I don't knock anybody for it. But as somebody who comes from a high availability world where I kind of like my data to be reliably stored in the database, I'm a Postgres kid. What can I say? Yeah, my boat has racing heritage. The mold for my boat was from CNC's 38-foot racing hull. It's literally a race boat, just with a different keel, a different sail plan, and a different interior layout. But the hull itself was a racing hull, which is one of the reasons why I chose it, because that means it's going to be very easy to push with electric. Butterfly, Papa Bale, miles per hour junior. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what you're asking when you say butterfly ? Please clarify your question, because I'd love to answer it. I just don't know what you mean by that. And if you mentioned it earlier above, I'm sorry, I've missed it. Yeah, the NUC's 100% recently set up a 4x cluster of i5 32 gigs running under X. Yeah, I'm not putting that much power on my boat. I value the battery power more. But yeah, NUC's, like my company that we use the Dell Optiplex Micros, which is basically Dell's version of the NUC, the Core i5 and the Core i7s, to run our ScanCore software, and they're brilliant for that. So I know a Core i5 or a Core i7 with like 16 gigs of RAM and 250 gigs of hard drive would be more than enough. I'll have two of them, but one of them is going to be powered off. It's just going to be a backup in case the other one dies. I'm only going to run one at a time for keeping the power consumption on the batteries as low as possible. Mark, after working in the cloud for the last decade, I'd buy a cluster of 3 machines with replication, makes maintenance way easier. Dude, my whole day job is building on-prem high availability clusters. When the cloud got popular 10 years ago, I'm like, everybody's running that way, so I'm going to run this way. I love on-prem. I'm all about on-prem hardware. Small sailboat. Is the Butterfly a small sailboat? I'm single-masted, maybe 12-foot. Okay, if you've got a 12-foot boat, then yes, that's a small boat. My boat at 38 feet, I know is not considered a small boat. But compared to what a lot of, if you go on YouTube and you look at the cruising people, I mean, first of all, half of them are cats. So already double the width, actually more than double the width. But most of them seem to be like 40 foot or longer. So compared to modern cruisers, my 38-footer is humble. Great advice. One of my friend's parents just bought an old West Sail 32 and is going to renovate. So anything on that renovation advice? So let me be clear. I decided that the West Sail 43 wasn't for me because I wanted to push it with electric. The West Sail 32 is going to be more maneuverable than the West Sail 43, but it is still going to be hard to maneuver. Principally, especially if you're going astern. So like where my boat used to be, you noticed I was always stern into my finger dock. I was stern into the dock. The dock was behind my back. So I would come down the fairway in reverse, and I would have to turn at the last minute to bring my boat in. There was a Passport 40 a few slips down from me, which is a full keel, much like the West Sail. The mechanic who would often help me, Joe, he was saying that he hated moving that boat because he had to be going at least 3 knots just to have the rudder have a bite on the water so he could actually control it. So you imagine you've got this really heavy boat, you're in tight quarters, you're going at least 3 knots, you swing it around, and then you have to punch it forward to burn off that before you strike the dock. If your parents are new to boating and they have a West Sail 32, the biggest worry I have is having the nerve to be able to have, like, you have to be very confident when you're maneuvering that boat. It's going to be terrifying. There's no two ways about it, and you're just going to have to do it. My best advice would be, if you could go out, if there was like a buoy in the water not too far from where you were, so you could imagine that was like put like a quarter, like imagine that was the edge of a slip, and practice backing up and then turning by the buoy, and then getting used to maneuvering in tight quarters when you're not actually in tight quarters. So you can build up the confidence for when you have to come in and dock. Because you may have a slip that you can pull up sideways, which is pretty easy. But at some point, unless your plan is to always come back to your own personal slip, you're going to find yourself trying to maneuver in tight quarters. Make sure that you're confident before you start traveling so that you're not trying to learn at the last minute kind of thing. As far as renovating it, I really hope you got a survey before you bought it. Now, I believe the West Sail 32s had a cord deck, but they don't have a cord hull, meaning you don't have to worry about a wet core for the hull itself. If you have any spongy issues, like if you've got any moist core, buy a moisture meter. If you haven't got a survey done, look for any kind of moisture and fix it ahead of time. Recoring is a huge job, but it can be done. Sail Life did a huge one on recoring their hulls, Mads and Ava. I don't know if that was a good enough answer for you, but if you have any specific questions, ask. I am not a boat expert. I'm not an expert in anything except for high availability. So take my answers as just being the advice of somebody you're having a drink with, not as an expert's advice. Anything I can stand up inside of is a small boat. Anything you can stand up inside of is a small boat. I don't follow, Mark. Usually it's the other way around. If you can stand up, unless you're... I don't understand that. So like poor Colin, when he was on my boat, he was banging his head all the time because he's like 6'1". he had to find a boat that was tall enough. Oh, can't. Okay, now it makes sense. Yeah, that was poor Colin. Colin's boat. Oh shit! I know it's Magic Dragon, but I can't remember the make and model of it. But he had a really hard time finding a boat where he's like 6'1" and it's like a 32-footer or 33-footer that he could actually stand up inside of without always banging his head. My boat's 38 feet, and he was wailing his head all the time in the boat. Do you know your knots? Not as well as I would like. I finally got pretty good at the bowline. Now, I brought the boat home and I haven't been on the boat, so I've probably forgotten it. I am learning my knots. I'm not the kind of person that learns really well. Like if I just sit here and just practice, I'm not going to do that. I need to have a purpose. So when I'm on my boat and the boat's back in the water, I'll be getting more practice on my knots. I am okay with my knots. I am not good with my knots. I'm like 6'1.5" in the morning. So you are just slightly taller than Colin. If I ever have a meetup and people join me, all I can say is duck. Poor Colin banged his head so many times on my boat. Yeah, I think I've caught up with chat now. So I'm trying to think, is there anything else? What low-powered Wi-Fi solution are you thinking of implementing on the boat? I imagine that you're going to maximize physical connections for most systems. But so when it comes to anything critical, helm, sensors, everything, I want to put cameras on my boat. Everything's going to be hardwired. So like I was, ironically enough, just looking at PoE cameras yesterday. I do not trust wireless, period, full stop. Everything that is important will be hardwired. I will have Wi-Fi on the boat for my phone and my laptop and gas and stuff like that, but everything that's important is going to be hardwired. I don't plan to use Bluetooth for anything. So I was talking earlier about how I wanted to have my phone act as the key for my boat's helm. So it has to be able to see my phone in order to be able to turn the helm on. For your main processor, a Jetson or Orin, 4 or 5 different versions from 400 to 2000 might be a good idea. Okay, yeah, so there's a lot of companies that make those small, like NUC-like computers. I'm assuming that's one of them. Travis, I'll talk about my motor in a second. So on the Wi-Fi, I will have wireless, but anything on the boat that has wireless, it has to be a quality of life thing, or it has to have a wired override. So I was talking about making a remote control. There's going to be a switch on the helm that you have to flip to turn on the remote control, so that if the remote control ever acts up, you can go to the helm, flip a switch, and that puts it under mechanical, like the direct helm control. I don't trust wireless. On Logic makes IP-rated small computers. So the computer is going to be inside of the main cabin, so I'm not too concerned about IP rating. But that is good to know, if only to keep the humidity out. For your main process, okay, yeah, we talked about that. Same panels as a Raspberry Pi, but with an enormous amount of compute. Okay, David, that's good to know. The motor I've got, so I go into a lot more detail in the decisions made video, but the motor I have currently is a 10 kilowatt Golden motor, 3-phase permanent magnet motor. That's 10 kilowatts at the output shaft. The input is 13 kilowatts. I'm also going to have a 5 kilowatt motor for efficiency at low speed. That motor is, ironically, it's listed as a 5 kilowatt, but the max output is 6 kilowatt and the max input is 8 kilowatt. But it's the exact same. So I can't lift it up because it's too heavy and it's strapped down to the board right now. But the 10 kilowatt motor, you'll notice that there's 2 wires coming out for each of the 3 phases, and there's 2 Hall effect sensors. I found out after I bought it, inside of the case, it's literally just 2 5 kilowatt motors bolted onto the same rotor. That's it. So I'm going to have a second 5 kilowatt, which will give me more efficient at low speed. I am probably going to have another 5 kilowatt. Oh, here's something I haven't talked about yet. So my boat is being designed to keep the 1980s aesthetic. I want the boat to look like it could have existed in 1981 if sci-fi was a thing. So that's why I'm going to have like the big heavy mechanical switches, and I'm going to have like the red dot matrix character display. It's all, I want everything that you see on the boat to look like it could have existed in 1981. So that's what I'm doing. I don't want to use OLED displays. I will have a screen for Navionics, but it's going to have a wood cover for it, so you don't see it unless I'm actually using it. But, wow, my brain just completely jumped in. Oh yeah, I was talking about the outboard. So on my dinghy, I want to have an electric outboard, but what I'm currently planning to do is buy a outboard from the 1980s that has like the whole 1980s look, find like an old beat up one, and then take the gas engine out, put an electric motor in it. And so the outboard looks like it's from 1980s. So that'll be a 5 kilowatt motor in there. And yeah, so I'll have that 5 kilowatt. I will have the 5 and 10 for the propulsion. And here's something I've been thinking about relatively recently. I haven't talked to, actually, no, before I get into that, let me see if there's any more questions. Orion isn't optimized for this case unless she really needs, yeah, no, I have no need for GPU whatsoever. From a mechanical engineering perspective, how much is left to solve to equip your electric motor? Mac unknown. Right now, the single biggest thing left for me to figure out is the engine mount. So the prop is coming in, I'm saying 15 degrees. I haven't actually measured it to see if it's actually 15 degrees, but the prop shaft comes in at, okay, so it's a bit weird because it's a compound angle because the hull is sloping down when the prop shaft is coming up. So imagine I rotated it so the hull is flat. The prop shaft is coming in at about, I'd say 15 degrees. And the motor mounts come up from that. So I have an angle where the motor mount is flush and the prop shaft is relative to it. I'm going to build a plate that straddles between the two motor mounts and then has to be canted at the right angle to intersect with the prop shaft at 90 degrees. So from the prop shaft, I have to have 1 or 2 thrust bearings to be able to transfer the power from the propeller into the engine mounts. So that metal has to go through, like the power comes from the prop shaft through the thrust bearings into the metal mount that mounts onto the engine mounts. I hope that makes some sense. I'm sorry if it doesn't. So that has to be engineered, but then there's going to be a flat plate where there's going to have the 2 motors. So imagine if you've seen the videos where when I'm standing in the companionway and I'm looking into the engine bay and the prop shaft is right in front of me. So I'm going to have a pulley and the 2 motors are going to be mounted aft facing forward. So I'll see 2 wheels for the 2 motors and a wheel for the prop shaft. And they're going to give me my 4-to-1 reduction. I want to make it so that I can easily move the belt from the prop shaft 1 motor over to the prop shaft and the other motor, depending on whether I want to run the 5 kilowatt or the 10 kilowatt. I don't want to have clutches or anything like that because I want to keep the system as dead simple as possible. So I'm probably going to have 2 spring tensioners on the belt. I don't know what any of that's going to look like. I've got a vague idea of what's in my head, but that is mechanically probably the last major thing still to solve. I mean, there's a lot more than that, but that engine mount, motor mount, tensioners, belts, ratio gears, that's a big thing still to sort out. But that's the last big thing to sort. And physically, where am I going to mount my batteries? Because I have to put the boat in the water. I will put probably 1 or 2 batteries in when the boat goes into the water, and they'll be mounted just aft of the electric motors. And then once the boat's in the water, I will start putting in 1 more battery at a time and see how it affects the trim of the boat. And I'll literally just bring the cells in and just physically place them there so that the weight is there. And then get out of the boat and see how she's trimmed. And I will put as many into the engine bay as I can until she starts to look aft heavy. And at that point, I have to stop and decide, do I ballast on the bow, which can introduce hobby horsing, or do I move the batteries to somewhere else in the boat? And if I'm going to do that, where? So that's a mechanical thing I still need to sort out as well. Yeah, no, I don't, Taurus, I don't trust wireless for anything. Mark, full charge, what would be the minimum autonomile in nautical miles? So I'm assuming what's my range? So again, I did all of this math in the decisions made and a lot more accuracy than I can do right now. If I was looking to absolutely maximize range, with no concern for speed. I believe I can do 3 knots at 900 watts input power running on the 5 kilowatt motor. So I have 100.3 kilowatt hours worth of batteries, so 100,300. I've lost 4%. Let's say I've lost 6% by the time I'm actually in the water. 5% just to make it easy. So times 0.95. So let's say I've got 95 kilowatt hours usable when the boat goes in the water. And I divide that by 900 watts. Oh, not times, divide. You can't see what I'm doing here. I'm sorry. That's 105.87. So say 106 hours I could run at 900 watts. This is not assuming any other loads. So at 105.9 hours, at 3 nautical miles, that's 317 nautical miles, 100% charge to 0% charge by math, if my 900 watts for 3 knots is accurate, which I'm pretty confident it is. Now, that's, well, here, if I come back to the number of hours, 900 watts, at 105 hours, divide by 24 hours, that's 4.4 days of being able to travel. If I haven't got wind after 4 days, well, first of all, if you're in the doldrums, not always, but generally you have sun. If you don't have wind, you have sun. So I'll get more solar during that time. So I'll be able to extend that range some, because I know if I'm trying to maximize my range, I'm not eating any warm meals, I'm eating cold meals. If I really need to, I'll even turn off the fridge if I have to, so I can maximize that. But yes, I believe in an absolute maximizing range perspective, I should be able to easily get over 4 days on one full charge. Okay, so dual motors. Okay, I think I missed a bunch of questions here. From Plus wireless, full charge would be the minimum. Okay, so I think I've answered that one. Oh, let me answer it with the realistic. So on my trip home, if I was trying to do the trip home again through the Erie Canal, I would be okay doing 4 knots. If I'm right, 2,200 watts should get me 4 knots on my boat. That gives me 43.3 hours of runtime. Now, going through a lock system, generally the locks are only open for a portion of the day. So on the trip home, I was only doing about 8 to 10 hours a day. So that's about 4 calendar days, 43 hours, running at 4 knots. At 5 knots, which is the speed I did on the trip home, I think I need 4,500 watts to do 5 knots. That's 21 hours, meaning I could go 2 solid days on one charge at 5 knots. So there you go. There's the longer answer. Jonathan Bradshaw, dual motors kind of good. If one half does, you can disconnect the windings and keep sailing on the other half. Okay, I think I know what you're asking. So being my day job is high availability, I'm always thinking about redundancy. It's one of the reasons why I built my batteries to be all fully self-contained, completely self-contained. So any one battery failing, I lose 1/7 of my capacity. I've still got a decent amount of capacity. With the motors, each motor is going to have its own motor, controller, and cooling loop. They will be totally independent of one another. So if I lose the controller, if I lose the cooling loop, I burn up the windings, if anything happens and I lose one of my 2 motors, I can move the belt over and keep on going. So I'll have full redundancy on the motor. Obviously, if I lose the 10 kilowatt, I won't be going as fast and I'll struggle if I have any kind of adverse currents, but at least I can keep moving. Like when I had my fuel blockage, on the Hudson, if that had been the loss of my 10 kilowatt, my 5 kilowatt would have got me to the next marina. I wouldn't have needed a tow. What do you think will be the peak amp draw? Oh, wait, hold on. Did I jump some questions? Tim Crystal, you can't get Navionics to work on a green screen. I don't know if I understand your question, Tim. I'm sorry. Please clarify, because I'm curious what you meant. Travis, what do you think the peak amp draw will be? Okay, so that's a bit of a complicated answer or question. In theory, I bought the Kelly controllers with a CAN bus option. So when I originally bought this motor and this controller, my plan was to buy a second 10 kilowatt motor and a second controller for redundancy. And that was before I realized how inefficient they are at low speeds. And that's when I changed my plans and I decided to go for a 5 kilowatt. But I believe if the 5 kilowatt has the same Kelly controller, the same brand, it'll be a same model, but it'll be a lower capacity because I don't need 600 amps for it. I believe I can run both motors in parallel. I don't think I'm ever going to need to do that. But from a mathematical perspective, if I did that, it's 13 kilowatt. If I ran the 10 kilowatt at absolute full power, that's 13 kilowatts. And the 5 kilowatt at absolute full power is 8 kilowatt. So that's 21 kilowatts in theory if I had both motors in parallel and was going full 100%. Now, the reason why I don't think I would ever do that is my diesel is 27 horsepower. Forgetting the whole 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio thing I talked about before, mathematical, it is 1 kilowatt is 1.3 horsepower. So at 21, well, that's output. Okay, 21 is the input power. Hold on a second here. 10, maybe 1600. 1600 kilowatt output power. So 16 times 1.3. This is directly equivalent to a 21 horsepower motor. But again, you get a lot more torque. But getting back to the question of 2100 kilowatts, 2100 kilowatts, 2100 watts, 21,000 watts. I am really good at math tonight. At 21 kilowatts, at 51.2 volts, which is the nominal voltage, that's 410 amps. Now, I highly doubt that will ever happen. Realistically, full throttle in the 10 kilowatt is the more realistic thing that could happen. I don't think it would, but it could. 13 kilowatt divided by 51.2 is 254 amps. So the Kelly controller that I bought, air-cooled, can do 240 amps continuous. It'll do 600 amp for 2 minutes. Water-cooled, it'll do 360 amp continuous, and I bought the water block for it. So I should be able to run my motor at like 90% power with no liquid cooling. With liquid cooling, I can go easily to 100% and hold it all day long. But I don't plan to, in practice, I don't see myself ever going beyond 5 knots or 5 kilowatts input power. If I need to overcome a current or I'm trying to get unstuck from the ground, I may have short bursts where I go over 5 kilowatt. I think like 8 kilowatt or 8,500 watts was what I figured I would need to hit 6 knots. I might do that for a short period of times, but I didn't do 6 knots when I was under motor. So like whenever I was running the diesel, I never went over 5 knots, like 5.1 knots. So I don't see myself ever going higher than that on the electric. So realistically, if I did 4,500, which is what I think I need for 5 knots, divide by 51.2, I think I'll be running about 88. So say, realistically, I don't see myself going over 100 amps on any given day. And the wiring and the fuses and everything is going to be designed for much higher than that. Okay, so let's see, what have I missed? Dual motor avionics. Don't forget the other. Okay, so tourist. Anyone who's older will remember that computers used to have a turbo button. So if you remember on the video when I was configuring the Kelly controller in the last episode, there is the low, medium, and high, which is the alternative use of what would have been reverse, neutral, and forward. I'm going to have a switch, and it's going to be Eco Turbo. I will literally have a turbo switch on my motor. So yes, I'm not going to just have a turbo button. The turbo button is going to work. I think you're also legally required to add the Night Rider scanning lights. Okay, so not my name. You're not the first person to suggest that, and I desperately want to do it. So if you remember at the bow of my boat, when I was doing the lights, there's a little piece like a teak step that goes between the pulpit at the front. I want to put a Night Rider strobe under it. However, I will only be able to run it during the day because at night I need to have my nav lights. So I have to do something to make sure that it can't turn on under. I'm going to have a light sensor anyway, like an ambient light sensor for flipping on the red lights. So I'll have the ambient light sensor that will disable the Night Rider strobe. But yes, I am going to have a Night Rider strobe on it. How could I not? Okay, let's see. Where was I? That's a lot to figure out, but I'm sure you'll take your way. So, Mac Unknown. I'm very, very fortunate to have, I mean, I'm a weirdo, and most people who start a YouTube channel are weird, so we get along. A couple of my friends run YouTube channels, and they were build channels that became travel channels. And it's been something they've been really struggling with because obviously people who are interested in builds, once you're not building as actively anymore, your viewership falls off. And I didn't really want to be a travel channel anyway. So part of the reason for having all of these really ambitious plans is so that once I'm actually on the boat and traveling, the channel's not going to change. The only difference is going to be you're going to see I'll be building weird stuff. It'll just be in a different background. Like, oh, there's the Norwegian fjords. Okay, let's build something. Let's play with this sensor. So part of the reason for doing this is A, I do it anyway, but B, it means that even when the conversion is done, the channel is going to stay a build channel. Let's see. Jonathan Bradshaw. Oh, wait, Mark, 4 days. Wow, that's good. Yeah, I know. It's one of the reasons I'm going so crazy with the battery bank. Now, I should say, that's assuming I can get all 7 batteries onto the boat. I talked about putting the batteries on once I'm floating. I may find that I just don't have the space and I just can't put all the batteries on. So that number is conditional on me actually being able to fit all the batteries onto the boat. Jonathan Bradshaw, sorry I'm a latecomer and missed that you had 2 separate motors already. No worries whatsoever. Join whenever, ask questions. I have no problem answering questions twice. David Nunya, that's rather clever. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to, but thank you. Mark, I wonder what the efficiency of the 10 kilowatt is using just one winding and how different. Oh, geez, now you're getting into levels of electric motors I don't know. Kevin, nice to see you here. Yes, I don't do many lives, but kind of felt like it tonight, especially because I'm probably not going to have a video this weekend for reasons I talked about earlier, because I am trying to learn STM32, and that does not make for good video content, and it takes a lot of time. 21.1. Okay, so that's a Back to the Future reference. 1.6 gigawatt, or I think it is. Anyways, so speaking to the whole 80s theme, I mean, I love DeLoreans. Of course, I love Back to the Future. So you remember the flux capacitor thingy that was between the 2 seats? It's like a triangle type of thing with it's got like a CRT monitor suction tube on it or whatever. It's glorious. It's classic 80s sci-fi prop. What I want to do is I want to get LED strips that come out from that, 2 LEDs per spoke. And those LEDs, I want them to be a state of charge monitor. So it'll be the state of charge of 6 of the batteries, making up the 3 spokes. So if you've seen Back to the Future, if you've seen the flux capacitor, you'll see what I'm talking about. So imagine they basically climb and grow and shrink depending on the state of the charge of one of the 6 batteries. Let's see. Dang, I just saw this. Ted, well, hey, I'm still here and I'm still going. So if you have any questions, please ask. I have no problem if people ask questions twice. You might be going up a river, Mark. I'm not quite sure what that was referenced to. I go up a lot of rivers, usually without a paddle. The mermaid will outrun the Kraken. My boat is fast, but it's not that fast. At the end of the day, hull speed is limited. There is Practical Navigation, his YouTube channel. I think it's Practical Navigation, who has fantastic videos on theory of boating. And he talks about why hull speeds are what they are. And basically what it is it's a relation to the length of the water line of the boat. So that's the part where the boat just comes out of the water, bow to stern, whatever that length is. As you're traveling through the water, you cast a wake off of your bow. As you go faster and faster, you basically start to fall into your own wave. And once the period of the wave is equal to the length of the water line, you cannot go any faster unless you have a planing hull. So speedboats, they sink into the water, but as they go faster, they have really powerful engines, so they can actually climb up out of their own wave and they start gliding along the top of the water. That's what's called being on plane. So if you have a displacement hull, like all sailboats do, including mine, you can't climb out of your own wave. So no matter how powerful your engine is, I mean, within reason, you cannot go faster than your hull speed. because that's the point where you're climbing up your own wave and you just can't go any faster than that. So yeah, even with a really big prop and a powerful motor, there's a limit to how fast I could go. Can you run during the night, Kevin? If you mean, can I run during the night? Like, I'll have all of the lights to legally run at night. Are you asking this from the perspective of, am I using my solar to directly power my motors? Because if that's the question, then when I have solar and I'm under motor, yes, the power from the solar will go directly into the motor instead of coming out of the battery, so my batteries will last longer. But the batteries themselves are really big, relatively speaking. So yeah, running at night will be no problem whatsoever for me. The turbo button confusingly reduces the speed like the ones on the PC did. So it's going to be a 3-position turbo switch. So if I flip it the wrong way, I will slow down. Oh, okay, yes. So the reason turbo switches existed is that in the early days of software, like 8086, 286 days, a lot of the software was just written with no concept of timing. It was just the CPU speed was a certain speed, and they wrote the software to run at that clock speed. Because the CPU started running faster and faster at an exponential rate, like if you wrote a game for like an 8086 or an 8286, it was playable because the CPU was relatively slow. But as the CPU got really fast, the game sped up. So the idea behind the turbo button is that when you press the turbo button, you slowed down the CPU so that you could run the old software at a reasonable speed. So yes, the turbo button, because people wanted their computer to go fast, was always on. So you would press the turbo button and slow your computer down. It was weird. Oh, wow, there's some old memories coming out of the memory banks today. All that will change is the lab will be on the boat. Tourist, I don't quite understand the question, but am I going to have a lab on my boat? To a certain extent, yes, but my boat is very space constrained, very space constrained. So I am going to be very limited with what I can take onto the boat. Now, one of the reasons why I got this oscilloscope is, instead of like a standard desk type, is because it's really small and can pack down. Everything I buy, everything I've bought for the last 2 years, I've always asked myself, where is this going to fit on the boat? So I am trying to buy small, compact, space-efficient tools so that I can have as many tools as possible when I go onto the boat. Some of my lab stuff is not going to make it just because I just don't have the space, but I will be taking as much as I can so I can keep doing this project. Mark Rose, message redacted. Tim, Crystal, hello. Sorry, I'm back. I was pulling your leg a bit. I started comparing in T981, 1981, and had a VT100 on my desk just to chuckle to think of what we're using now. Oh, yes. Navionics. I was talking to a friend of mine. I had a problem where my Magic Mouse just disconnected from my laptop. It just stopped working, and I had to reboot it. And I mentioned this to one of my friends, and he was laughing. He was like, that's what happens when your mouse has more computing power than a Commodore 64. And I'm like, is that actually true? This is running a variation of an STM32. And it is significantly faster and more powerful than a Commodore 64. A mouse. It is staggering to stop and think. For anyone who's like my vintage, who grew up in the 80s or older, to think about the computers we had and what we did with them and how little computing power they had compared to what a flipping mouse has today. It's staggering. It's mind-blowing. Kevin, love the rant. This is the best movie ever. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. You might use full power up some. Oh, yes, Mark. Okay, so this is exactly where this is why I want to have the 10 kilowatt. So the current plan, when I was going up the Hudson River, when I was first coming through New York City, I was in a flood tide. So the tide was coming in. So for the first, like coming through New York City and leaving the city and starting to go up the Hudson, I was doing like 9 knots over ground. And a lot of that was because the tide, I was going itself like 2 knots. But of course, the tide shifts. So later on that night, after the cameras turned off, because it was nighttime, it turned and I was doing like 2,500 RPM and doing like 4 knots over ground. I was doing like 5.5 knots in the water, but I was fighting the tide. So in that situation, I'm going to need the 10 kilowatt. And now probably if I have to do a river at night, or if I have to do a river against the tide, because that changes depending on whatever, you can have an adverse tide in the middle of the day. It would just happen to be night at that time. Then yes, I would have to run a lot more power on the motor, and that's going to significantly hurt my range. And this is, again, something that when I've got all of this data coming in from like being able to predict the weathers and predict the tides, I want the thing to actually say, you want to maximize your range, put your anchor down until this time, pull your anchor, and then keep going. Because yeah, fighting currents, fighting tides is very much a thing that can dramatically affect the amount of power you need to make any headway. How much of your journey will rely on getting sufficient solar energy? Have you calculated minimum generated kilowatt hours you need during your crossing days? So Wizard Tim, I think I answered this on the Zoom. If I answered this earlier, then apologies to people who heard it earlier, but I don't think I did. So in my design, one of the things that's a bit different about my plans is that to me, solar is only there to offset house loads. I am not banking on my solar for charging my propulsion bank at all. If it does, awesome, bonus points. But all of my regen plans, all of my charging plans on crossings is coming from my propeller. So a lot of the electric conversions that I found have not really paid a lot of attention to regen. Ocean Volt is well known in the commercial world right now for the available commercial electric boats. They have the best regen. They are all very cagey about sharing how much power you can get. And I think a lot of it is because it comes down to the propeller you have. Very quickly jumping, Chris. No. I mean, in theory, yes, but tides would have to be absolutely insane. And I will answer the question now. So with hydrogeneration, so whether you've got like a Watt & C that you stick off the back, or whether you've got an electric motor with regen like I'm going to have, turning that into electric power requires having a certain amount of energy passing over the propeller blades. You have to spin the propeller blades with enough power to get things spinning so you can actually generate electricity. Brunton, which is the company I'm going to be buying my propeller from, they have their EcoStar. So if you want to look it up, the specs, if you want to play at home, it's the Brunton EcoStar 430 millimeter, which is about 17 inch. Very big propeller. It is designed specifically for electric propulsion. And they show a graph, and I'm pulling the numbers from my memory, but I believe at 4 knots speed in water, I should get below 4 knots, nothing. The graph doesn't even show anything. So at 4 knots, I start to generate about 350 watts of power. At 5 knots, or no, is it 5 knots I get 350, 6 knots I get 500 watts? Something like that. It's below a certain speed, you get nothing. So technically, if I was anchored and the tide was going 4 or 5 knots, yes, I could generate power, but I'm not anchoring anywhere where the tides are that aggressive. It's going to rip my anchor out of the ground. Anyways, my cats are fighting. Anyways, guys, I'm on a live stream. Don't you know what that means? Okay, no, they don't. They're cats. Getting back to it. The boat that I've got is built on a racing hull, and I can already see what that means in the real world, in that when I was sailing home and sailing before I came home, even in relatively mild winds, I could easily hit 6 knots, 7 knots without any effort whatsoever. And that's one of the reasons I chose this boat, because I am banking on the majority of the recharge for my propulsion bank coming from when I'm being pulled through the water under sail. Now, obviously, being able to hit 7 knots under sail when my props are feathered is a lot easier. When I engage regen, it's going to slow my boat down because you don't get nothing for free. If I'm generating electricity, I'm stealing that energy from the boat moving through the water. But if you recall, one of the things I was saying was hull speed is when you can no longer climb out of your own wave. So if I could have, my boat could have gone longer. So with the exact same sail plan and the same weight, if I had a longer haul, I could have gone faster. It's one of the reasons why cats are so fast, catamarans. So I can use my electric motor when I've got decent wind. I can dial in how aggressively it's generating electricity. So if I'm getting decent wind and I'm getting like 7 knots, I could dial up the regen to start generating more and more electricity, and maybe it'll drop me to 6 knots. Or maybe the wind's strong enough that even with that dialed up, I'm hitting close to hull speed anyways. Tangent, bringing it back. If I can get 500 watts at 6 knots, I think 6 knots for my boat is an entirely reasonable speed to get when I'm under sail. And if I get 500 watts, you notice how many ifs I'm saying here, but if I can get 500 watts at 6 knots and I can sail continuously on a crossing at 6 knots, that's 500 watt hours. 24 hours in a day, that's 22 kilowatt hours per day. My battery bank is 95 kilowatt hours if I get all 7 batteries on. So if I burn my battery right down to 0%, which I hope to never do, but let's say I did, 5 times 22, yeah, not even 5 days of crossing, and I would fully recharge my batteries. This is a lot of theory, this is a lot of math, and I can't say any of this is accurate until I'm in the water and do sea trials, but if my numbers are right, the primary recharge for my house bank is going to be when I'm under sail. Let me see. I meant the Night Rider lights during the night. Oh, yeah, Kevin, no, I definitely cannot run the Night Rider lights at night. The reason is that your navigation lights, you have to have your red on your port, which is facing forward, your left side. You run green on your starboard, which facing forward is your, no, sorry, green is facing forward is on your right side, port is on your left side. The angle, like it's like a 215-degree sweep, and it like the light that's sent out, the color of the light and the angle of the arc is defined under like Coast Guard rules. So if I put a red streaking light back and forth, because it's streaking, you could kind of argue that it's not a nav light, but it could absolutely be confused for a nav light. So no, I could absolutely not run the Night Rider light at night, not legally. Let me see. Have you calculated the minimum generated kilowatt hour you need during crossing days? Okay, so Wizard Tim, I just sort of answered that question, I think. If I didn't, feel free to ask follow-up questions. When you have the time, you should update your Good DIY Boat and Battery channel recommendations list with all of the channels you suggested tonight. I really need to sit down and create a list of channels I recommend. I mean, I'm still a tiny channel myself, but I'm a hell of a lot bigger than I ever thought I would be, that's for sure. And there's a lot of great ones out there, like SV Bombadil. That's where I got a lot of my numbers that I was using for my range calculations. They've only got like 1,000 subscribers, and they deserve way more than that. So yeah, I should put together a list of channels I recommend. Can you sail to Australia and rendezvous with Off-Grid Garage for a few drinks? I absolutely plan to go to Australia. I would love to meet up with Andy if he'd have me. I don't know if I depends how crazy he thinks I am by the time I get over there. But yes, I absolutely plan to get to Australia. How many watts of supplemental solar are you planning to run? Oh, that's a big question. It's a very, very, very rough number right now because I don't have a solar arch, and I haven't designed a solar arch. And I don't know how much, I was talking about the weight of the batteries. Depending on how much I weight up the back of the boat and how much it messes up my trim in the boat, I may end up saying, I just don't have a lot of weight for solar, and I'm going to have to be a lot more modest. But the number I'm working with in my head, and it is extremely vague, is 1,000 to 1,500 watts of solar. Will I get it? I don't know. I have no clue. Again, solar is there to offset my house loads. So if I have to lose a little bit of solar, I lose a bit of solar, and I just don't use my house loads as much. How many watts of supplementary solar do you plan to run? Turbo off, didn't even slow the clock speed, but inserted no op opera. Okay, we're getting very nerdy, but yes, I see what you're saying there. I joined midstream. Have you resolved the insurance issue? Plain Preacher, no. No, I have not. I talked a fair bit about that earlier. If you watch the replay after, I don't know when it was fairly early in on the call. Hey, Holden man. Travis, so if I can afford the weight of glass panels, yes, I will use bifacial. If I have to be careful with my weight, Brewpeg, they have, I think they're the SIGS panels. They're a kind of semi-flexible, sticky back panel. They're like way lighter. So bifacials are generally any monocrystalline glass panel is easily 22% efficient, plus any bifacial gains. Bifacial means that any light that reflects off like behind you, like, if I get any light bouncing off the cockpit and hitting the underside of the panels, it can generate a bit of electricity from the light striking the back of the panel. That's why they're called bifacial. If I can afford the weight to build a hard Dodger, a hard Bimini, using the solar panels as my roof, I will use bifacial. If I don't have the weight budget, I will probably put the SIGs in, but the SIGs are like 12 or 13% efficient, so they're way less efficient for the surface area, but they are a lot lighter. So it's going to depend on my weight budget. I can't even think about the solar until the boat's in the water and I see how she's sitting with the batteries in. Only then can I start actually making more firm plans on solar. Jumped. Princess Walt, ahoy, happy Friday. Will your turbo button have an associated 7-segment display with its selected clock speed? So I'm going to have these like 2-row dotted LCD displays. I do want to have some 7-segment displays. So 7-segment is like the old-fashioned like calculator where it's like, if you've ever seen like the old digital clocks, like the alarms that people used to have before their phones were alarms, that's the 7-segment display. I very much want to have 7-segment displays kind of paying homage to Back to the Future. So yes, what will be displayed on them? I plan to have momentary contact switches so that any one of the displays, I can flip the momentary contact and cycle through what is being displayed there. But yes, I definitely want to have 7-segment displays. PS, just logging on, and I'm Spectrum fan, not Commodore Halden. Okay, well, you know what? Those words are from the 1980s. If you're using retro, I'm happy. Would it be feasible when anchored to reach? Okay, yeah, I already answered that. No. Again, as physics would say yes, if I could anchor and keep my boat in one place and the tides were running 4 or 5 knots or faster, my anchor's not going to hold. So not practically. Turbine atop your boat, wound to a serpentine coil and bobs your uncle. Oh, so there's a huge discussion on those types of different types of way of capturing the wind to charge. Wind generation is incredibly finicky and not very efficient, and I don't plan to use it because honestly, I think it would take more power by shading my panels than it would give me in power generation. Are the cats going to join you on the... Okay, so the kitties. My patrons know this already. Mr. Tatters is sick. I hinted it at the last video. He went blind very suddenly. Somewhat miraculously, he's got some of his sight back, but it's fundamentally kidney disease, which caused high blood pressure. Anybody who's had cats much in their life knows what kidney disease means. It's a question now of how much quality time we have left. I would love to believe that we've got enough quality time that he's coming with me on the boat. We'll see. But kidney disease is kidney disease. If a miracle happens and he's still healthy when I'm on the boat, yes. I'm a little bit more worried about Kepler, the orange kitty, because he is super sketch and he spooks and runs very easily. I'm worried that he might get spooked and run off the boat. So my aunt has already offered to take him in if necessary. I will probably do some trials with him on the boat this summer. Because Kepler is so scared, I don't think it's safe to have him on the boat. And because of Tatter's health issues, it's looking like no. And it makes me incredibly sad to say that. Now I'm going to stop thinking about that because I want to be in a good mood and I love my kitties dearly and that kind of makes me sad. Anyways, with all the wind, maybe you could power a turbine. So Mike Jones, I just mentioned about the wind turbines. The problem with wind turbines is that they don't generate much power until they're close to their maximum speed. But once they go over their maximum speed, you have to brake them. because otherwise they spin too fast and they tear themselves apart. So there's a very narrow wind speed window where you actually get proper power generation out of them. And at that wind speed, they're very noisy. So I don't plan to have wind power generation, because having a post high enough up that I could put the fan to catch the wind means I'm going to be shading my solar panels. It's just not worth it for me. So unless something happens with wind generation to change my mind, the plan is no. Remouse beating the pants off a Commodore 64. Modern continuous glucose monitors get thrown away every 10 to 14 days and run it. Yeah. We take for granted the amount of horsepower we have computationally wise. Like, we throw away disposable stuff that has way more computing power than things that were super expensive in the 80s. Mike Jones, that can be very noisy. Okay, so you answered that as well. Big fan of the channel. Well, thank you, Stephen. And a longtime sailor. What kind of boat do you have? Any plans to come east end of Lake Ontario this year? So, Stephen C., yes. There's a whole lot of ifs. But if I can get the boat in the water this spring, I want to use this summer season to sea trials the motor, just basically put the boat in the water and beat the hell out of it, so that when I come out for the next winter, fall, winter, spring, I can do whatever I need to do so that I can move onto the boat full time summer of 25. If I can get the insurance sorted out and I get the conversion done and I get into the water and there's enough season left and things look good, I want to go to Montreal and back. So that would take me to the east end, northeast end of Lake Ontario. We won't tell you if you do. David Nunya, I'm not quite. Oh, wait, did I miss some chat? Sorry, David Nunya, we won't tell you if you do. I'm not sure what that was in reference to. I'm sorry. You answered it, and I agree, sounds feasible. A flashing red light could also be easily confused a distress beacon. Yes. For lots of reasons. Lights at night have a lot of meaning in sailing, so you don't put any lights up that you don't need. What happens? Okay, so Chris, I answered that question. Compfixer44, love your channel and cats. Thank you very much. Second to buy fan. So like I said, if I have the weight budget for glass panels, yes, they'll be bifacial. Yeah, the SIGs. So, okay, SIGs was the right name. So the flexible planners are SIGs. So SIGs, if I don't have the weight budget, SIGs are what I'm going to use for my solar panels. They're a lot more expensive and they're less efficient, but they're very light. And Damien and Jess are just, they're super happy with their panels. They can provide much more if the light reflecting off the water and hit. Okay, yeah, you're talking about bifacials. Yeah, David, I mean, if you bring a pet into your life, you bring them in as a kitten or a puppy, and you know from day one that this is how it's always going to end. Someone once said that humans are to animals what elves are to humans. It's you give them the best life you can. Thank you also, Tourist. Yeah, and that's where it is right now. I've got him on blood pressure medicine. I've got him on kidney medicine and a renal diet to keep his kidneys working. I'm doing everything I can to buy as much time as I can. I mean, optimistically, I could have another year or two. Or it could be in months or weeks. I don't know. So fingers crossed. Mike Jones. Maybe ultimately you can't get more energy out of wind than you can sail from. Yeah. And that's just it. It just, if I had space and I had maximized my solar and everything else was equal and I still had space, yeah, I'd put wind on. But with the limited space and weight budget that I have, yeah, wind just doesn't make sense to me. Let me see. You have wind generation already? Yeah. David Nunez, wow. I'm not quite sure what that was in reference to. So I'll be getting right on inverters and I'll get right on inventing those solar sails for you. Yes. So there is a company that has integrated solar panels into their sails. But from what I understand, they don't generate a lot of power and they don't last very long and they're very expensive. It's something you do if money's not an object. And for me, money is absolutely an object. As you can see, I think I mentioned earlier in the call, I don't exactly have the highest living standards. I come up here to do my lives because downstairs it's exposed 2x4 and rough plastered drywall. I am not a luxury channel. Let's see. But if you manage an efficient turbine, you don't have the disadvantage of not needing the wind to blow at certain directions. Yeah, it's not the direction of the wind that's concerned. You can have pivoting head. It's the fact that if you look at the power output curve, it's very, very. Let's say that it's rated as a 1,000 watt wind generator. That 1,000 watts might come at 30 knots wind speed, and by 25 wind or not, you might already be down to like 300 watts, and then below that, it's like 100 watts if you're lucky. And the problem is, 30 knots is like the max, and above that, if you hit 35 knots or 40 knots, you have to brake, like put a mechanical brake on the turbine because it's just going to blow itself apart otherwise. So it's that if you lived somewhere where you had constant wind at a constant speed, like you're always anchored in the Caribbean, for example, where you could trust that the wind was always going to be blowing at a certain speed, a wind generator makes a lot of sense. But in my kind of sailing, it's just not. Stop at Kingston. Love to get a good, once I'm on the water, anybody who's in the Ontario region, drop me an email. If I'm on the boat, people are welcome to come by for a visit. I mean, so long as I'm not busy doing work or whatever. If anybody's in the area and that I can all swing it, I'm happy to have people come by for a visit. Your house is just like mine. It drives my wife crazy. Sunday, I was in the middle of renovations before COVID hit, and I expected to have it done, but then of course the whole world shut down. And by the time COVID was ended, I was ready to buy the boat. So I've been completely consumed by the boat project, and the house renos have just never picked up again. I need more hours in the day. Retro digital displays. So Plain Preacher, I actually considered Nixie tubes, but Nixie tubes are more 60s, and I really want to keep the 1980s aesthetic. And also Nixie tubes burn more electricity. As I do all of this, I still have to be mindful. Any one of these things might be 5 watts, 10 watts, but if you're not careful, they add up, and very quickly you have a noticeable draw on the system. So as I'm thinking of this retro design, I'm always trying to balance how much power is this going to actually consume, so I keep my parasitic loads as low as possible. Yeah, and the noise of I know you can get wind generators that aren't as noisy anymore, but there's so many downsides, and the upsides for my use case just aren't there for wind generation. I never received that much wattage out of my wind turbine or flexible panels compared to glass panels. Yeah, this is why I very much want to have glass panels if I can all swing it, but I just don't know if I can afford it from a weight perspective until the batteries are in the boat. If I've got all the batteries in the boat and she's still sitting really trim and it's not a problem, then I can take, say, I think it's like what, 8 kilograms or 10 kilograms per panel. I can take that much weight and just stick it where the solar arch is going to be mounted onto the hull. Just put the weight there and see how it affects the trim. And if I can put like 50 pounds on there and it's not affecting the trim, then sure, I can go glass panels, or 100 pounds or whatever it ends up being for the solar arch and the panels. But if I'm already sitting heavy by the stern, I just can't afford it. Let's see. Mathmos lamps, original lava lamps designed in 1963. Okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Again, in my boat, because the original owner did nothing to it, like it's got the original curtains that the boat came with in 1981. I am going to be doing everything I can to keep the original 1980s aesthetic, and I'm only going to be adding in the 80s sci-fi for the electric conversion stuff. I'm going to try to keep everything else as authentic and period correct as possible. Life's about trade-offs. Geez, boating is all about trade-offs. I caught up with chat and it's been an hour and 47 minutes. So I am happy to keep going, but I think we might be getting close to the natural end of the live stream. So I'll give a couple minutes to see if anyone else has any additional questions or whatever. And if not, then we'll wind her down. 40 watts. Yeah, and that's the thing is 40 watts doesn't sound like a lot until it's on a long time. But the biggest problem with lava lamps on a boat is the fact that they're pressurized and they're glass. The last thing I need is to be tossed around in a storm and something hits the lava lamp and it explodes, and now I've got glass shards inside the boat. Gear reduction. Kevin, no, I did not. So When I was spinning the motor, I had it in medium speed and I put the throttle at almost full speed. Then the floor started to shake and I backed it off. But I think the highest speed I saw was about 2,500 RPM. Looking at the spec sheet, it looks like it goes a little over 4,000 RPM. The prop that I'm looking at can't go over 1,000 RPM or like 1,050 RPM. If I go faster than that, I start to get cavitation, which is where you start to create vapor bubbles off the trailing end of the propeller as it's spinning through the water. And when those collapse, it's a shock wave and it actually can pit the propeller. So if you spin a propeller too fast, it literally turns into moon rock or like Swiss cheese. You start literally banging the metal off of it and it chews it up. So I have to make sure that, I mean, that's another one of the benefits of having a computer control is I can read the Hall effect sensor and I can read a sensor right on the prop shaft so that if the prop starts to spin too fast, it can tell the STM32, no more throttle, back it off. You're going to damage the propeller. I see Korean. Let me see if I can put this into a translator really quickly because I would like to know what it says. I'm really, really curious to see what this says in Korean. To English. I am looking at the motor voltage control carefully. Oh, okay, cool. So let me respond with, share. I love living in the future. Okay, this is machine translated Korean. Let's see. I hope it's okay. Back to here and put it in the comment. There. Wow, I completely lost my track. Oh, RPM gearing or motor gearing. So as it stands right now, I think I'm going to have a 4-to-1 reduction ratio, meaning that the gear on the propeller is going to be 4 times the diameter, radius. I guess it doesn't matter. It's going to make 4 turns. The motor has to do 4 turns for the propeller to do 1 turn, 4-to-1 gear reduction. Now, I don't know if that's truly going to be the case. So when I go into the water, I'll probably go in with a 4-to-1 reduction ratio, but I may find that I have to tune that and I may have to replace the pulleys afterwards. I know, we are getting so close to Star Trek live translators. They're not there yet, but I think it's going to happen in our lifetime and I can't wait. So the whole reason, I don't know how to pronounce your name, my Korean friend. I'm very sorry. I know that's Hangul and I know that you're supposed to be able to read it and translate it, but I don't know how to do that. But anyways, the whole reason I wanted to get the boat was to travel to as many different places as I can. And my favorite part of traveling isn't seeing land sites. It's going to have a drink with people and like getting to know people. And like, as I go to different parts of the world, I want to find people and help them. Like that's my, like, if you ever watch Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe, I think that's his name. Anyways, he goes to some job site that's a dirty job and he helps them and he learns about the job and talks to the people. I kind of want to do a travel version of that. So whenever I go somewhere, I want to find someone. It's like, I'm going to be here for a few days. Anybody want some help? And while helping, learn a bit about the place I am, the people there, the community, the culture. And yeah, anyways, but language barrier is the thing that makes me kind of nervous. So I'm really, really, really hoping that machine translation keeps getting better so that by the time I'm actually traveling to other countries, I'll be able to do like real-time translation with people. So language barrier doesn't become a barrier. Will you maintain the prop shaft that's in the boat or redo the whole thing? Redoing the whole thing. So I was talking to Damien, because well, if you've watched Project Brewpeg, you know they do a lot of metal work. And because I was talking to him about thrust bearings, and I found out that when I took the prop out to replace the shaft log, I realized that there's a bolt that goes clear through the prop shaft at the transmission, and that's the thrust bearing. The thrust bearing is the point where when the propeller is spinning, the prop shaft wants to move forward, and uncontained, it would just push itself up inside your boat. So you have to have some way of taking that push and transferring it to the hull of the boat. And it does it through this bolt that goes through the prop shaft that connects to the transmission. The transmission is connected to the engine, and the engine is mounted on the engine mounts, which is the hull. So we were looking at that, and when I realized that hole was drilled through, I realized I'm going to have to cut that off, which is going to shorten the prop shaft. And because I have to put a 4-to-1 gear ratio, I want to bring the prop shaft as far forward as I can so that I have the most clearance from the hull. So I know that my cutlass bearing, which is, there's a strut that comes down on the back of the boat that catches where the prop shaft is sticking out free. It provides support. That bearing is worn and it's already chewed into the prop shaft. And after 42 years, the prop shaft is probably not straight anymore. It's probably got like a banana bow to it, exaggerating, but blah, blah, blah. And the prop I'm buying is going to have its own cone angle and thread pitch. So if I kept the original prop shaft, I would have to cut it shorter or put extension. I'd have to do something to deal with length. I would have to get it straightened. I would have to deal with the chewed out part from the cutlass bearing. Like, I would be doing all of this work to it. And my prop shaft is 1 1/8 inch diameter. That's a very, very, very bog standard rod that any metalworking place is going to have. So he was saying, look, the labor that you would pay for them to refurb your prop shaft, just buy a new prop shaft and call it a day. So yes, I'm going to be having a new prop shaft, and that's why. Mike Rowe, yes. Great show. Usually large panels make more use of the space. Yeah, so Comfixer 44. Originally, my plan was to try to get, like, the ones that are like 1 meter or like 1.2 meter by 2.3 meter, like these massive panels that you see for solar installations. And I was going to try to I wanted to find a single panel that was higher than 60 volts so I could run one panel on one MPPT, because I have 48 volts, which is actually up to 58 volts, and you need 5 volts higher than that to turn the charger on. So if I wanted the charge to be able to go up to like 55 volts, I need at least 60 volts out of the solar panel. I can't find any single panel that does that. But when I was thinking about that one massive panel, I was not thinking about windage. In a storm, if I know that I'm out and I'm not going to be able to get away from a storm and I'm going to be hit by a heavy blow, I need to be able to strike my sails, but I also need to be able to strike the bimini, which means I have to be able to take the panels off and put them down below. Because if I leave the solar panels and I get caught in a gale, that wind is going to be hitting those solar panels and potentially ripping them off, potentially doing damage, but at the very least, making it extremely uncomfortable inside the boat. So I'm probably going to go with much smaller panels, and it's going to be a question of finding what's the biggest panel that I can easily take off and move down below. The biggest panel that I can move down below, where 2 of them would fit on one side and collectively would give me higher than 60 volts. I hope that makes sense. If I can use glass panels. But yeah, because when you're looking at the number of watts per square meter, you have to subtract the frame and all of that stuff. Is weight, if weight allows. Yeah, weight and windage are 2 really big things. Instant two-way language translate. Oh, I hope that happens. I mean, as it is already. Like when I was traveling in Japan last time, it was about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, before COVID hit. I went to a ryokan and I stayed, like it was a traditional Japanese inn. And the lady who ran the place didn't speak really any English. So it was like later in the evening, I was just down below enjoying a tea or something like that. And she started talking to me. And we talked by passing the phone back and forth. And we were using Google Translate. It was really awesome. So yes, I really, really, really look forward to two-way translation. That makes sense. Very off topic. Are you a Ubiquiti user? And do you have an opinion? I am not a Ubiquiti user, but from everything I understand, they're perfectly decent. I have no strong opinions when it comes to networking technology, except I hate Meraki, but that's a whole other story. I still think Bouge RV might be willing to give you a few SIGS panels to paste on the front of the boat. Mark, maybe. I'm not in a position to look at solar until... I don't think I'm going to start seriously looking at solar until spring of 25. Because this season is just get the motor in. I mean, I don't even have insurance yet. Never mind, I haven't removed the diesel. Never mind, I haven't built the mount for the motors. Never mind, I haven't actually installed it or built the battery cases or. I don't know if you can hear Kepler down there. I have a lot to do just to get in the water, and I just want to have this summer to see if my math is right. Get the sails up, see what kind of regen I get. I want to take one of my batteries offline and take the other 6 and go full out and like try them at different speeds to see how much power I consume, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to consume this entire summer season. and into the fall. So come the following fall, I mean, the channel's already way bigger than I ever thought it was going to be. Like, I couldn't imagine in a million years I'd have over 12,000 subscribers. So to me, sitting here right now, I can't believe I'll ever get big enough to catch the attention of someone like Bougerv or some other type of company. But I mean, I'm already somewhere I thought was impossible. So who knows where I'll be by the spring of 25. So come time by then, I've already, with the channel as small as it still is, but as large as it is now, it's an oxymoron to say those two things, but I've had lots of sponsorship requests and none of them have ever struck my interest. I don't really have any interest in taking sponsorship, but if the right option came along and it was something like, if someone came along and were like, hey, we'll do sales for you, or we'll do running rigging for you, or we'll do winches for you, or blocks, or whatever, those are expensive and I need them. So I'd be really hard pressed to say no. So we'll see. Basically, what I'm getting at is I'll see where we are when the time comes for those parts. As of right now, there's nothing in the electric space that interests me from a sponsorship perspective. And I'm not big enough to get any real money from a sponsorship, like not enough to make a difference. So I'm not even thinking about that kind of stuff at this point, but in time, maybe. Now, if an insurance company wants to sponsor me, yes, tomorrow, just tell me. Anyways, missed one. So your boat is going to be a sleeper boat, like a retro sleeper PCs. Kind of, yeah. So the idea I'm imagining is, so once the diesel engine comes out and the tank comes out, the diesel tank comes out, I'm going to pull apart all the running gear and whatnot. I want to use that opportunity to completely clean up the inside, degrease it, clean it, and paint it bright white. I want to put nice LED lights in, make it really easy to work in there, because lighting was the worst problem. But why not make it a little 80s futuristic as well? So I was talking about having like the flux capacitor, but actually having it serve a purpose, showing the state of the battery of the 6 batteries. If you look into the engine bay, that's going to be no limits, full 80s sci-fi. The control panel will be muted 80s sci-fi. In the interior, like the living compartment, I want to keep it looking as bog standard as it was, like true to the way it was when it came out of the factory. Kevin, can a boat be on the water without insurance? So technically, yes. There's no government regulation that says you have to have insurance to be on the water. As a responsible boater, to me, so this is something I mentioned earlier, so I won't belabor it too much, but for the longest time, I thought only irresponsible people had boats on the water without insurance. Now, knowing how I've been trying to do everything right, I've got my certifications, I've been above board about everything, I'm doing everything to ABYC standards, and I still can't get insurance. I'm becoming a lot more sympathetic to the idea of people who run without insurance. And sure enough, there's a lot of people on the water who don't have insurance. If you've got an older boat, if you've done any kind of real work to it yourself, insurance companies just don't want to touch you. So I am going to do absolutely everything in my power to have at least liability insurance. And I have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. But if all of them fall through and I've truly done everything I possibly can to have insurance and I just can't get it, I'm not giving up on my dream. So, but that's to me an absolute, very much, I do not want it to go that way. The Korean friend posted something again. Let me see what they said. Flip. Translate. It's cool. All the research on the motor controls in the ship. Oh, I need to learn a little bit of Korean. From everything I heard, Hangul is actually a really fascinating language or written system to learn. And my cousin lives in Seoul, or just outside of Seoul. All right. So your boat is going to, okay, can you, oh, tourist, you were saying that I missed somebody else asked that. Thank you. If I've missed any other questions or comments, please let me know. David, I'm a scaredy cat. I wish you'd Keep a small engine for worst case scenarios. So David, I understand where you're coming from, but I think there's a bit of appeal to tradition there. And the reason I say that is, look at all the work I did on my boat before I came home. And even still, I broke down 3 times, 3 bad times. I broke down when my starter wasn't working and I lost my starter battery. I broke down when I had some debris get into my fuel pump and leave me stranded on the Hudson. And I broke down when the impeller blades pulled itself apart and I overheated the engine on the Erie Canal. An electric motor is far mechanically simpler. A lot of people think they're more complicated because you have shit like this. But as a mechanical device, they're super, super simple. And the fact that I'm going to have a 5 and a 10 kilowatt means that I'm going to have full redundancy. So I would argue that post-conversion, I will have a much more reliable boat than I did when I had my diesel. I understand a lot of people will disagree with me and possibly vehemently, and I get it. But this is my position. It's my boat. It's my neck on the line. I think I'm actually going to have a more reliable boat with a longer effective range on crossings than I would if I had a diesel with a tank of diesel, a diesel engine with a tank of diesel fuel. Should add some speakers that make a diesel engine sound, which you can turn on as a joke. Okay, so I'm not much of a car person, but my daughter is. Dodge is apparently coming out with an electric car and they're putting gas engine noises in it, which I would never buy a Dodge to save my life, but I have to give them points for that. That is so goddamn cheesy. I love it. I don't care for loud music, but I do like the music I listen to sound clear and crisp. So Andrew, who's been helping me with all of this, his real job is making musical instruments. He's a classically trained violinist. He knows his audio really well, and he's promised to help me come up with an audio system on my boat. So there's no reason why I couldn't put diesel sounds in there if I wanted to. This is an optometrist in my area of Southern California that has an office that is full-fledged Star Trek. Okay, Kevin, I would love to see pictures of that if you ever get there. My email is in the About tab. That is brilliant. David Nunez, insurance on airplanes. I couldn't even begin to wonder how much harder. Oh, geez. Yeah. As I understand it, if you ever want sailing to look cheap, get into hobby airplanes. That's all I'm going to say on that. Do you have to get insurance in Canada, or could you one day get it from an insurance in another company? So briefly revisiting what I talked about earlier, there's an insurance company called Edward Williams, which they do not have a very good reputation. I do not want to go with them, but they will write insurance policies for almost anybody. You have to be very, 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 very careful that everything about your boat is disclosed, so you give them no reason to decline a claim, because they will use any reason they can to decline a claim. They're my fallback, and they are not Canadian. So yes is the answer to your question. I really, really don't want to go that route. I have faith in I know my broker is doing his absolute best to find me a good insurance policy, and I'm giving him all the time I possibly can because I really want him to find me something. But in theory, yes, I could go to the international market if I need to, and that is plan C. Put some bike pedals on it, classify it as a bike, no insurance. Yeah, no, I know you're joking. Mike Jones, isn't all law based on the water or something like that? Isn't all law based on the... Oh, you're talking about like maritime law? When you're within so many miles of a country's shores, you're under their laws. There's international law when you're outside of those. Law doesn't require me to have insurance. Marinas require me to have insurance. Most marinas will not allow you to come into their marina if you don't have insurance. That said, a lot of them don't ask. Actually, I don't think any of them asked me when I was coming into dock. The only time I've had to prove insurance was when I actually paid for, like where I am now, I had to prove to them I had insurance. And when I was down in where I bought my boat in Safe Harbor, I had to also prove to them I had insurance. So I will say again, I cannot stress enough how much I'm going to do everything in my power to have insurance, and I think you should have insurance. But at the end of the day, if no company says yes, then what are you supposed to do? When you enter a court, you enter a ship. When you enter a court, you enter a ship. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. But there is a single failure point with the batteries. David Nunez. Okay, so no, there isn't. Not on mine. So you'll notice that as I built my batteries in the older videos, each battery has its own T-class fuse, its own BMS, its own main disconnect switch, and its own Anderson connector. Each battery is fully self-contained. And I did that consciously so that any one battery can fail and I lose 1/7 of my total capacity. Well, assuming I get all 7 batteries into the boat. If I get 6 in, then I lose 1/6 of my capacity. But I designed my batteries. I had a lot of people said, well, why didn't you just do a 6P16S configuration and make it one giant battery? That's exactly why. I wanted to make sure that no matter what happened, if I lost a battery, I only lost a fractional percentage of my range and my capacity. So in my particular situation, because of how I have designed my system, the only single point of failure that I really have is the prop shaft and the prop itself. And if I can all afford it, I will buy a second propeller and keep it, at least buy spare blades and keep them in a spares kit on board. So, and part of the reason why I've been going through all of this process of learning how to configure the controller and wire up the motor and build the helm controls is so that I have the knowledge and the tools to fix anything on my boat. So again, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm not saying that electric boats are always more reliable than diesels. But the way I have designed and built mine, I think my boat and my setup is more reliable post-conversion than it was pre-conversion. There is one is none. Yeah, 2 is one is none. Yeah, belt and suspenders approach. Absolutely. And so one of the things when I build the throttle, I'm going to have 2 throttles. And one of the things I'm planning to do is, you know how I've got the 10K pot? When I build it, I'm actually going to sandwich 2 10K pots, and there's going to be a toggle switch so that I can say, listen to channel 1 or listen to channel 2. So if I notice my throttle starting to act up, once I notice the throttle starting to act up, I can just flip a switch and start reading from the other pot. And if both pots are messed up, I'll have a spare throttle in my spares kit, and I'll just have it as a plug. I'll probably get like a Deutsch connector or something like that. So I could literally just go down below, get the spare helm or spare throttle, unclip it, clip the new one in, and be off to the races. Diesel sounds button next to that turbo button. BTDT. BTDT. I don't know what that stands for. Did you talk to Western Financial yet? No, Mark, I haven't. I don't know that company. Western Financial. Let me copy paste that so I can look into it later. Now, if they're an underwriter, my broker has been reaching out to pretty much every underwriter in Canada. So even though I may not have heard of them, my broker probably has. Redundant total circuitry too. So much of it. So one of the things, if you saw the big battery build, I have the 2 big 600 amp bus bars that all of the batteries are going to link to, and then coming off that bus bar will go to other systems. One of those, these are 2 new 250 amp bus bars. So the power coming from the batteries will go to, so imagine from like the battery bus bar positive is going to come to this positive bus bar, and then 10K motor, 5K motor, and then a spare for all the other stuff that are on there, like the switches and whatnot. So there's going to be some places where there's going to be just one wire running between 2 bus bars, for example. But coming from a networking background, I'm going to leave enough wire for either a proper service loop or at least enough slack that if I have to cut and re-terminate an end because an end's gone bad, I can do that. And because I have the hydraulic crimpers and spare terminals and everything, if any wiring goes bad, I can fix it. So not full redundant circuitry, but again, show me a diesel boat that has that, or like any sailboat on the world that's out there that has full redundant electrical. None do. I'm going to be in a better position than most. So full redundancy? No, it's impossible. I'd have to have twin screws to do that and twin everything. Twin helms, twin everything. So at some point you have to strike a balance. I feel confident that the balance I'm striking with the tools and spares I have have far less chance of being stranded than I did on my trip home with the diesel and the electrical as she was. call these connectors Anderson connectors. I use those daily. Yeah, I started using them a lot when I did server room powers or UPSs. That's how they use them, and I quite like them. I know some people don't for some reason, but I quite like Anderson connectors. I use those. Yeah, so the ones I've been using for the batteries are 175. I'll probably get the 350s for. I'll probably use a 175 for the 5 kilowatt, and I'll probably use a 350 for the 10 kilowatt. Simply because I know that there's a safety margin, and I don't expect I'll ever go over 175, but I could. So the wiring going to the 10 kilowatt will be sized for 13 kilowatts, whatever that is, 260 amps, which means it's going to be a big honking wire. Again, I don't plan to ever hit it, and if I do, not for long, but I've got to size it assuming that it's full power for an extended period of time. Happy diesel noises. Cute. Clean diesel sounds. Yeah, I download a bunch of MP3s. Do I want to sound like I have a sick diesel? Been there, done that. Oh, BTDT. Been there, done that. Airplane insurance. Okay, yeah. So then you understand my pain. They do boats, but that was the company you had to call and not use the website. Okay, I did a search for them, so I'll look them up after the live stream's over. Good morning from the old solar guy in the air, Mike Unum. Hello. This boat is sounding like an airplane when it comes to redundancy. So tourist, my day job, I'm the founder of the company. It was a high availability company. Like literally everything my entire professional career for the last like 15 years has been, what happens if that breaks? So I can't help but bring a lot of that thought process into the design of the boat. I don't think you have to have this level of redundancy to do an electric boat, even an offshore boat. But it's what I want to do, A, because it tickles my nerd glands, but also it makes me feel more comfortable about long distance excursions. I could use the 350 for both, but actually I want to make it so that I can't get the wires backwards. So having a 175 and the 350 means that I can't accidentally plug the wrong controller into the wrong motor. I mean, if I really needed to swap them around, like if I blew up one of the controllers and I had to swap, like if I blew up the motor controller for the 10 kilowatt and I wanted to steal the 5 kilowatts controller to run onto it, I could move the wires and then go into my software and say, don't allow it to go above this certain speed. Multiple levels of failure. Quite interesting to read up. Yeah, so in redundancy, you design it so you can survive any single point of failure, but if you've properly designed your system, you should be able to survive multiple points of failure so long as they're not two failures in the same subsystem. Yes, it is. I made a massive software testing. It's funny because the beeps you heard coming in on my phone was our CI/CD integration system broke, and it was just messaging me telling me that it came back up. What do you do when your testing environment breaks? Cable size would be enough indication, though. Yeah, probably. But I mean, that's the other thing too, is the gauge of wire. I don't think the 175, I think I'm going to have to run 4-aught for the 260 amp. 3-aught will do 200 amp on paper. I'm not worrying about that on the batteries, because there's no way I'll ever pull that much from the batteries because the load's distributed across the multiple banks. It's another reason that's a benefit of going to multiple banks. But I'm going to probably be running 4-aught for the 240 volt or for the 10 kilowatt motor, and I just physically don't think I can put that into the SB 175s. Will you be able to test the throttle controls in dry run mode when you're getting running? Yeah, absolutely. So I'm doing it all on the bench right now, so the motor's spinning under my control already. The idea would be, while I'm up on the hard, once I've got the engine mounted, I'm going to have thermistors. I'm not going to pull them over there, but I've got the motor has thermistors. The motor controller has thermistors built in, so they can tell their own internal temperatures and cut back if they overheat. But I'm going to have my own external thermistors that I'm going to feed into the helm. So I can do it on the land, and if they start to overheat, it's just going to throttle back. So it'll still spin the motor. I'll lose some power if it starts to heat up too much. So running it dry won't be a problem. That, and the fact that the cooling loop that I'm going to use for the electric motors is going to be air sourced. I'm not going to be sucking water up from the sea like I did with the diesel, because I don't need to. I'm not generating that much heat. So I don't need to be in the water at all. I could spin the propeller all day long if I wanted to. Who never made a 60-volt DC short circuit? Don't know how bright light can be. Oh, Mike Unum. Okay, I think you're referencing my little oops very early in my channel history. Yeah, okay, so Ken, yeah, 175 didn't go bigger than 1 aught. That's what I thought. So I'm going to have to do the 350 anyway. Now, that said, oh shit, if it doesn't go bigger than 150, I'm going to have to use the 1 aught, then I'm going to have to use the 350 for both because I'm going to need the, I think I need the 2 watt for the 5 kilowatt, and I'll need the 4 aught for the 10 kilowatt. So yeah, I'm going to have to use 350 for both anyway. There you go. When under stress conditions, not everything seems as obvious as it would under normal conditions. Yeah. And this is one of the benefits of having a software-controlled helm is that I can't panic myself into mistakes. Like when I was coming home, especially when I was having trouble docking or I was having trouble trying to pull up in the locks, a couple of times, because I was starting to get overwhelmed, I forgot to go from forward to reversed. Or I forgot to put the throttle to neutral before I shifted between forward and reverse. And a couple of times I just dumped from forward to reverse with the engine still in throttle. When you're stressed and panicking, you make mistakes. By having everything controlled by software, you can sit down and think about all of these things when you're calm, when you have time, and you can program in all of the safeties so that even if you panic at the moment, your software is going to save you from yourself. 350 goes up to 4 aught, so there you go. So John Peter, sailboat, sails is your primary propulsion and kind of motor is auxiliary. It's absolutely true. And when I was first thinking, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I say right before I talk about why I disagree with you. That is, there's very few people left in the world who have the skills to bring their boat into a slip under sail. Some can do it. I am not one of them. So considering there's going to be times where I need to get into a slip to charge, ironically, if I'm going into a slip to charge, I'm going to have to program in a reserve so that the helm shuts down when there's still like 5% left in the battery. So I have enough power to get into a slip. Because of my skill level, I don't trust myself to not need a motor, which is one of the reasons too why the redundancy is such a focus for me, because you're right. When I'm just on a crossing big distances, yeah, sail's all I need. I mean, people have been crossing oceans for centuries without an auxiliary motor. But as a single sailor, as a solo sailor on a 38-foot boat with the experience I have, I consider my electric motor to be primary in those conditions, if that makes sense. 50... 175 is bigger, 350. When under stress conditions, okay, I already talked about that. And use numbering on the connector. Oh, I am a big fan of labeling. Everything is going to be exquisitely labeled. I'll see if I can screenshot a catalog I have working with all the SB stuff. I mean, if you're talking about the list of different SB products, I've got it all. I can get the PDF catalogs off of DigiKey. That's how I get most of the stuff. Or I can just go to Anderson's website directly. So I appreciate it, but it's not necessary if you're just talking about the catalogs for the various Anderson products. Great way to look at it. Electronics and programming, a lot of safety into the system. Yeah. Program on your comm. Program safety systems when you're calm. Agreed about the software blocks, but would always play some kind of, yeah. So I just hinted at the idea that I'm going to have the helm when it marks 0%, like with my electric car, 0% is not actually 0%. There's a reserve capacity in there after that. I plan to do something very similar. So when my batteries are actually at like 10%, the helm's going to assume 0%, but there'll be a button I can flip to say like emergency. And at that point, turn off all the safeties and let the battery go down to flat. Scuba gear. So I got my PADI certification when I was 16, and I've never dove since. I got hypothermia on my checkout dive in the Bay of Fundy in the Atlantic Ocean in Canada and New Brunswick. Most of you know I do mermaiding. When I was young and I did the scuba diving, I loved being in the water. I hated all of the equipment that I had on me. When I started mermaiding, I loved because it was totally free. There was nothing else on me. So I will have probably a small tank for being able to go under for cleaning the hull, so I don't have to keep coming up for breath. But I don't know if I'm going to have like a full scuba tank set. I love being in the water. I love diving. I definitely want to get into free diving. But I don't think I'll do a lot of scuba. I don't plan to have like a dive compressor or anything on the boat. Now, that said, ask me when I've been in beautiful waters, like if I'm in the Caribbean or if I'm in the Med and I love swimming in the water and some people take me diving, I may change my tune. But as I sit here right now, no, I don't plan to have scuba gear. There are more people who cross the oceans from Amsterdam in the Netherlands to the US coast with sail only. Yeah, listen, I know people can do it. I just don't, I'm not arrogant enough to think that I'm one of them who can do it. Crochet, yeah, I'm going to be, and I also, one of the reasons why, as I've been designing the electric system, I've been thinking to myself, that trip home, I can't state how important it was for reasons I didn't imagine before I did it. It's been an amazing perspective as I get into the final parts of the design stage for the boat. I'm constantly asking myself, could I have done the trip home up the Hudson and down the Erie Canal with electric? And the reason that is so important to me is because I want to be able to do rivers and canals in Europe and other parts of the world. I want to be able to unstep my mast and go inland. So obviously once the mast is down, you are a motorboat at that point. So I really, really, really want to make sure that my motor is as reliable and as long distance as possible. Oh, okay. Kevin's talking to tourist. Me love scuba. I know lots of people love scuba. I totally get it. I totally get it. And I love being able to stay underwater for a long time. I just don't like all the gear. Trains and Ribs did a tour. I would love to do some. Twice when I went to Japan, I got like 2 weeks JR passes, and I traveled around the main island on the JR bullet trains, or not just the bullet trains, but all of the trains. I love train travel. I could absolutely see myself during my travels putting the boat up for a month and traveling inland, taking trains and buses and just exploring. I mean, assuming I've got the finances to do it, I absolutely love to do that. Is it prohibitively expensive to heave the boat or to have the boat transported cross ocean? For me, it's absolutely prohibitively expensive, but it also defeats the purpose. I want to sail across the oceans. I want to take my living room with me when I go places. Peter Knowles travels with Geordie. He's been talking a lot about that. He's got a wood monk motor trawler, and he wants to take it back to the UK, and he's planning to put it on a ship. So people do absolutely transport boats across oceans on transport ships. So yeah, you could do it, and prohibitively expensive. If you're doing it once, you could probably save up for it, but unless you're rich, you're not doing it regularly. And again, I don't want to. I want to sail across the oceans. To me, that's part of the appeal. I want to go to all of the really remote places. He's in Kevin Costner gills. Waterworld reference, nice. Dude, if I could, let's get the genetic engineering going. I would love to be able to stay underwater. Again, I love being underwater. I just don't like all of like the buoyant, like the BCDs and all of the octopuses and stuff coming off me and the tanks on my back and the weight belts. And no, no. Sweet. I think I've caught up with chat, and it's been 2.5 hours. At the beginning of this, I wasn't sure if anybody was going to show up, and there's 50 of yous. Thank you all. I love it. So I guess I will do the same thing again. I'll give it a couple of minutes to see if this is the natural end or if there's any more questions coming in. Yeah. So one of the things I'm really curious about is I was really scared when COVID hit that I was going to lose my lung capacity, because I have very good lung capacity, which that could sound weird out of whatever, but before COVID hit, there was a mermaid convention. Yes, those are a thing. And my mom and I went, because my mom's just as weird as I am. And we took a breath hold course. So it's like when you're monitored and someone's got their hand on their shoulder and they tap you every now and then, and you have to do something with your hand to show that you're still conscious. But it's a static, so you're just laying there, you're not moving. I say all of this because you do breath exercise beforehand. This is not something I can do regularly. But the very first time I did a static breath hold, it was 3 minutes and 15 seconds, which I am very proud of. I don't know if I could still do it after 3 runs with COVID, though. I hope I can, but I haven't tried it. But I definitely want to get this is why I was saying I want to get into free diving. I really want to work with my lung capacity once I'm living on the boat. Have you figured out where to stash the booze for rum running? Like I'm going to talk about that on a YouTube channel. All right. I think it's 2.5 hours. That's much longer than I expected with a random live. So unless any questions come up very quickly, I think this is a good place to wind it down. Listen, I'm very open about a lot of things, but I'm not stupid. I mean, okay, I can be damn stupid at times. I can be smart when I need to. Well, thank you guys all for joining. This has been lovely since the beginning. Cheap ass AP or FPV. First person, is that from like the drones with the cameras, like the goggles? Because if so, I so want to try that sometime. Yeah, I'm glad people showed up. This has been a lot of fun. Cheap ass FPV, dude. I know it's dark, but seeing how the Ukrainians have been using it in the conflict over there, first person view drones, I think, is just it's a huge thing. Obviously not for war reasons, just for toy reasons, but I very much want to get into that someday. John Peter, thank you very much. Vet, I don't know if I pronounced your name right. I hope I did, but yeah, thank you. For everyone who says that you enjoy my channel, I want to make it very clear that I do this because for whatever joy you guys might get out of watching the videos and seeing these lives, I get at least as much doing this stuff. I'm largely a pretty introverted person, kind of. I have like very few real life close friends. This is like strangely fun to be able to meet so many people and talk to so many people. So the fact that so many people are watching the channel and subscribing and stuff like that, like I never thought it was going to be this fun. I love it. So yeah, when you guys say thank you to me, I return the thanks right back to you. All right. And no last questions. This is all just the good nights. So yeah, thank you all, everyone. And gold chest into the bilge. I build Mark, not in a public forum. Okay. This is where I wave, and I wait a second because I know there's a lag before I actually end the stream.